Sorry, boy, but his captain's got to teach his men what happens to those what crossing.
Captain's got to teach stuff.
Good morning from the Bat Cave. It is, I guess it's actually afternoon now, but it is July 23rd. It is Tuesday, and I'm going to finish up the book of Judges here, taking you through the second period of the Judges, which, if you remember the first period is mostly about Israel going from the initial highlands, because you remember they took the highlands up here, and then they had everything pretty much west of the Jordan River. But they really didn't control these lowlands here. If you remember, they have people with chariots down here oppressing them. The Philistines, they have initial victories against them during the days of Joshua, but then the Philistines seem to reinforce from Egypt, and they basically push them back and hold them to the mountains, and that's why the Danites have to come up here and take a city for themselves, because they can't really make any headway against the Philistines. The Canaanites are still basically reinforced, even though Joshua comes through and they have these big battles against them up here, and they burn Hazor, and they have a big battle here. You remember they have the first big battle at Jericho, and then Ai. Second big battle is going to be up in the highlands, where they're going to basically take out the lords who are ruling the highlands. So these are going to be the Jebusites primarily ruling this. And then the third big battle they're going to have up here in Hazor, and then Joshua's going to retire. He's going to do all that in 5 years. Then they're going to divvy up the land, and he's going to be like, you guys go take the rest, okay? So when you get into your secular history during this period, your secular historians are going to call bull crap and say, this is all bull crap because we have these records from Egypt, that Egypt was having wars up here, and Egypt was taking all this over, blah, blah, blah. So Egypt and Israel being prominent in this area are mutually exclusive, okay? Well, they're not taking into account what the book of Judges is really saying. They're not really taking into account the timeline of the book of Judges. It's very possible for the Egyptians to be running through here, because these are Philistines ruling this area right here, okay? And I mean, they pretty much have all the lowlands. All this territory that you see belonging to Dan, they don't control, and the book of Judges clearly tells you that. Okay, the Ephraimites don't control down here because of the charioteers they have. They control the highlands, but they don't control down here. And what you're going to end up having after this is a rebuilding of forces between the Hittites and the Egyptians. And the Hittites seem to be the ones that are rebuilding Hazor, which Joshua and them burned down. And then the Egyptians are going to reinforce the Philistines. And this is going to go on until they battle in the south of Judah here. And then the Egyptians are going to lose, and they're going to fall into decline after that. So you want to understand your Egyptian history, how it aligns with this. If you just, again, you want to understand a couple things with Egyptian history. One is Egyptologists don't totally agree on dates. They're ballpark pretty similar, but they don't agree altogether. It's even worse when you get to the dark ages of people with Babylonian history. You have like a 150-year range with scholars, which is pretty horrible to have that broad of a range of when these things happen. 150 years is a long time, and yet they'll still agree that we don't know who the Hebrews are. They're not real people, okay? Well, these people are found in the cuneiform letters under this name Haparu, okay? Haparu is going to show up in cuneiform records in Sumeria, and of all the records they have about where the Haparu are, they're exactly where the biblical Hebrews are, with the exception of the Arab Hebrews that are going to be other descendants of Heber that are going to be the descendants of Joktan. So if you look at the Haparu people, they're going to, from the Amonra letters and from cuneiform, these are all the regions where Haparu people are, okay? Well, the reasons they are in these locations are pretty simple. This is where Abraham came from. Abraham's going to move up here. Okay, so Abraham's brothers in those, they're Hebrews, and they're up here, and they're going to keep flourishing up there. He's just got one brother, but his brother's going to have descendants, and then there's other Hebrews. Abraham is like 4 or 5 generations removed from Hebrew, which is where the Hebrews come from, okay? The Hebrews are down here. Remember, they're descendants of Arphaxad, who is right up here. He's the father of the Chaldeans, so they're down here. And the Hebrews keep being talked about like these, almost like these country bumpkins that live on the outskirts of civilization. Well, they're nomadic herdsmen. So, of course they're going to live on the outskirts of civilization. There's not a lot of sheep grazing in the city. Okay, so they're going to be over here, And then around the time that corresponds with the Jews taking over Canaan, if you see all these red dots, these are all cities that are reporting on the Haparu to Akhenaten. Akhenaten is King Tut's dad, and Akhenaten is basically the one who's going to try to bring Egypt to monotheism. Okay, so around they know who the Jews are because the Jews kicked the crap out of them, proved their one God was God. Then they're going to wander through the wilderness for 40 years, and then over the next 100 years after that, they're taking over all of this. And these people are sending letters to Egypt because they were a tributary to Egypt, saying, help us, help us. These Haparu people are bullying us. They're taking all of our stuff. And then Hazor, which is the city that Joshua burns, is going to say, help, we're going to be destroyed by these Haparu people. Okay? So they're the Hebrews. Okay? The other places you have records of the Hebrews is then Elisha, and then up here, and then the Hittites. Well, why? Because the Danites become the sea peoples. They go take over this. Then they go up here, and they're going to sack Troy, and they're going to start a city called Dardana. And Dardana, literally in Hebrew, means generation of the Danites. Okay? And the Greeks, who aren't going to develop writing for about another 500 years after this from the Phoenicians, they're going to start up a mythological character named Dardana to try to explain where these Danites come from. Well, Dardana is literally right up the street from Troy. They sack Troy. This is where your Egyptians say when the sack of Troy happened, but it gets sacked multiple times, okay? So they sack Troy, and then 10 years later they sack Hattusa, which is the capital of the Hittites. So this is why you have accounts of these Hebrews up here, okay? Again, they're calling them Aparus or Haparus, okay? The other Hebrew people are reported down here. They're in the Middle East because these people are basically pushed out and driven out of here. Remember, Abraham is a Hebrew, and he defeats Amraphel, who seems to be Nimrod. Okay, this is what the Jews believe, that this is Nimrod or a descendant of Nimrod. During a time where you had basically Sargon of Akkadian starting out down here, and then his son or his grandson Naram Sin is going to extend the kingdom to up here, which puts them right on the border of Canaan. And then at that point, that's when they go take Lot and Sodom and Gomorrah and all that stuff, and that's when Abraham goes defeats them up here around Dan. Okay, so this army, this big army that had just sacked all these people here, ends up coming back in failure. And their kingdom goes into decline after that. It eventually gets taken over by the Amorites. Then it gets sacked by the Hittites. And then it eventually gets reemerges as a Kassite or a Cushite kingdom. And that's what it is around the time when we get to the book of Judges, okay? Now, even though you have Israel all around here, and remember, yes, all these people, the red dots, they're reporting on the Hebrew people. But Hazor is threatened by the Hebrew people. Okay, this is what the Amonra letters report. Well, that's because the Israelites aren't taking all this stuff down here. They're taking stuff from them. So in other words, they're just asserting dominance over them. Remember, this is exactly what it says in the Bible. It says they put them to tribute. Well, these are people who are speaking a foreign language. You don't have treaties with them. Putting them to tribute means we're just taking the stuff. Okay, this is your tribute, and if you don't like it, we'll kill you. Okay, so they're up here in the highlands, and they're coming down in the lowlands and just taking what they please from these people. Okay, as tribute. Okay, but Hazor actually gets destroyed by them. Now, Hazor is going to be. It looks like it's going to be reinforced because they're going to get all these chariots from the Mitanni, and that is going to lead to the reemergence of the Canaanites, who are oppressing them again, and then Barak and Deborah are going to defeat them, okay? And so around the time you're getting the Amonra letters, I want to show you, and they're warning about it being destroyed, or being threatened, you have Joshua taking the thing out, and then it's about 100 years later that these Amonra letters are saying that. So what's happening is Hazor is reemerging, probably being reinforced by the Hittites from the north, and they're getting chariots and stuff, and they're rebuilding, and they're still threatened by the Hebrews, and they're technically an Egyptian vassalage because the Egyptians are reinforcing the Philistines, okay? They're going to keep going until they get to this battle of Kadesh, okay? Now, there's two Kadeshes. There's a Kadesh in the north of Israel up here, and then there's a Kadesh in the south of Judah down here. Now it looks like they fight in this one, but remember, because Israel mostly controls these highlands down here, all of this are flat plains, and you still see the Egyptians rolling through their armies in the days of Josiah, 1,000 years later. Now, it's not 1,000 years later, it's about 800 years later, okay? Now, this is why your secular historians are going to say, oh, these Judahites were just basically these, nomadic tribes with maybe they had some chieftains, no real kings, no real power. Well, that's not true. They always control the highlands, and these highlands are going to stay under their control all the way to the days of the Babylonian captivity, okay? But there are times that they don't necessarily have total control over the lowlands, mostly because of the Philistines down here, and then because they start fighting amongst each other, and then because of invasions from Damascus and the Arameans, and then from the Assyrians, and it's going to get down to them just controlling the highlands again, okay? But these lowlands, you got to remember, they're over here, and the main enemies they're dealing with are all over here. So the first one is going to be the Kassites that come from up here. Remember, the Kassites are going to control Babylon again up to around this Mitanni region. The Mitanni are falling apart at this time. The Hittites are falling apart at this time. Assyria is starting to take territory from the Mitanni. And basically, they're up here, and they're not really at war with the Mitanni because the Mitanni is more of a trade civilization, and they're in decline. Okay, so the Kassite kingdom that is going to oppress them under Othniel, Caleb's grandnephew. Okay, he is going to oppress them from the northeast. So they're dealing with enemies up here. Then they're going to get oppressed by the Moabites down here, and that's who Ehud is going to deliver them from. Okay, so if you look at their enemies for the first, you're talking about, this is 150-year period. Their enemies are coming from the northeast and then the east, and then Ehud just kills 600 Philistines with a ox goad. And the Philistines seem to be oppressing them at this time, and Ehud just kills 600 of them, and that seems to be all that happens to him. Okay. It's after Ehud that the Canaanites are going to be kind of reestablished, because remember, they're dealing with oppressors. Oh, I'm sorry, the third one is the Midianites. So they're dealing with oppressors from all over here, okay? So that allows these guys over here to kind of rebuild their strength. Hazor seems to be an Egyptian tributary. They've got chariots coming. They're complaining about the Hebrews, but they're not overrun by them because they're mostly dealing with enemies up here and controlling their highlands, okay? Now, it's going to be after you get to Deborah and Barak, and Gideon has pretty much cleared this out, and then the Canaanites are no longer a threat right here. And it's around this time, if you see where Ehud is, that you have this Battle of Kadesh. Well, the Battle of Kadesh is going to be in 1274, so Othniel is going to defeat that king around 1350. He's going to defeat the Kassite king up here, okay? Now you're going to read after this, the Egyptians, this is going to be under King Tut, which is going to be Akhenaten's dad, that they're the ones who are defeating these Kassites. Well, they probably are, but Othniel defeated one of their armies that was oppressing Israel, and that leads to that Kassite kingdom to start to decline, okay? So what you have happening in Egypt, remember, around the time that Othniel has beat these Kashites, that's when Akhenaten is going to start to, or no, it might be towards the end of that reign, but basically the Jews are living in peace, the Israelites are living in peace for 50 years. Othniel's beat them, they're good for a while, okay? And you've got these Jews now, these Israelites now, who have defeated the Hittites, they've defeated the Canaanites, they've defeated the Egyptians, they've defeated the Amorites, which were all powers in their day, and now they've defeated the Kassites, okay? They have had basically about 100 years of just kicking ass and taking names, okay? Now, it's around this time that Akhenaten starts to put monotheism into Egypt. And he seems to recognize that these Israelites and their God are legit, and that seems to be why he's doing it. Now, I haven't deeply studied Akhenaten's monotheism. I'm going to do that more so in depth for my book, but it seems to be modeled on Hebrew beliefs, okay, about a single God, okay? And so he's trying to start trying to start monotheism, kind of around a sun god, and then after him, Tutankhamun, his son, revives the old Egyptian paganism. Okay. Now Tutankhamun, we know he's a historical revisionist because we know that Akhenaten's name and everything he was trying to do is getting wiped off the records. Okay. We also know that later Egyptian history is going to say that these Jews didn't beat them. These Hyksos were okay, remember Hyksos is basically Hicks. Okay, these hillbillies that invaded Egypt are being driven out now in these centuries before. Well, is that what their original records say, or is that what they're saying after they wipe out Akhenaten and they're trying to revive Egypt's glory? Well, it seems like under Tutankhamun they try to revive Egypt's glory because Tutankhamun is either full of crap or was very successful. Okay, he basically claims to be this warrior king. He has 100% victories. He never loses, but then other records seem to say that he's a cripple. So maybe he was injured in battle, or maybe he was a cripple who is just exaggerating, because he is trying to restore Egypt's glory from Akhenaten, basically almost bowing down to the god of these Hyksos, okay, these Hicks from the north, okay, and so Tutankhamun is going to talk about all these battles, and it's going to be him who says he goes up to Carchemish and defeats the Kashites, okay. So Tutankhamun, Othniel would have been the 18 years they were oppressed would have been 1383 down to 65. Okay, so 1365, and then Othniel is going to win around that time. So Akhenaten seems to be in the 1330s. Okay, his son Tutankhamun is going to be around the 12s, I believe, down through the turn of the 12th century. So he could have a victory against the Kashites after the fact, or he could just have knowledge that the Kashites are in decline, and he's just claiming that victory. The point is what we have not long after Tutankhamun is this Battle of Kadesh in 1274. Remember, let's see, Tutankhamun. So I'm sorry, he's going to reign from 1341 to 1321. So he's going to reign. Remember, I said Othniel defeats the Kashite armies. Somewhere around 1375. No, I'm sorry, 1383 minus 18 years, 1365. So they would have been defeated 15 years before him. And he's going to claim victories against them. Well, maybe he did have victories against them. Again, remember, the Philistines are kind of their garrison in the north. The youngest Egyptian tribe, the Caphtorim, that's where Cap comes from, and that's the tribe that the Egyptians come from. So it's the Philistines that are their main push up into the Middle East. And after Othniel defeats them, remember, this would be 15 years after Othniel kicks the crap out of their armies, this is going to be the furthest extent of the Kashite kingdom, which is really from down here, holding power up here. And then the Egyptians 15 years, or the Hebrews 15 years earlier, is going to defeat this evil double whatever Kashite Kushan evil guy or whatever, and they're going to defeat this guy. And then so this is the furthest extent of their empire, and Egypt seems to say they're coming in 10, 15 years later and having a great battle victory. Well, maybe they are, but they're already in decline, so it's not such a great victory. It's not like they're fighting them at the height of their power. Then they're going to go up to Kadesh and they're going to fight the Hittites and lose. Okay. So this is their battle with the Hittites is going to be about 1274. So you're looking at about another 50, 75 years later, they lose their battle to the Hittites, and they steadily lose their influence in Canaan after that, okay? So remember, the Amonra letters is going to be about 75, 80 years before this, and they're talking about the Hebrews left and right. They just call them Haberus, okay? The fact that your historian can't see that the Hyksos are the Hebrews and the Haberus are the Hebrews just shows like this blind anti-biblical bias that they have, okay? Because everywhere that they are is where the Bible says they are, okay, with the exception maybe of Assyria, but it's reasonable to go if they're here and here, it makes sense that they're up here. Again, these are nomadic herds people, so they're going to travel on the outskirts, eating the fields and dung the fields of all these big civilizations all around. And then what seems to happen, and this is my theory on how this happens, is this word Hebrew, I looked it up in cuneiform. If you take the letters, it's going to be 3 letters, and the words are going to be ha, bu, ru. Okay? Well, if you were to read that backwards, that's Uruba. Uruba. Okay? Habaru backwards is Uruba. Okay? Now this is important. Muslims read from left to right. The Chaldeans read from right to left, and the Chaldeans read from right to left. So if you're reading the same cuneiform tablets, what they write Habaru, you're going to see Uruba, okay? And Uruba, you end up having places called Araba, okay? And I think that the term Arab, which we don't find until the book of Isaiah, about maybe 500 years after this. No, it's probably like close to 600 or 700 years after this is the first biblical mention of the word Arab. I think these people were called Habarus, and then eventually they get ignorant, and someone's reading cuneiform and reading it backwards and saying we're Aruba, okay, so we're Arabs, okay, and this turns into Arabs. The Arabs literally, some people said it meant mixed people. It seems like it meant like nomadic herdsmen, so like Bedouin, okay? But it seems to be Habaru backwards in their reading it. Now, this is just a theory. I'm going to work on this to see if that goes anywhere. But what you find is the word Arab start to appear. Araba is what it is. Araba, okay? Remember, Habaru backwards is Uruba, okay? And Araba starts to appear, or Arabi or Araba starts to appear in cuneiform records. Remember, these guys are using cuneiform before and after the Tower of Babel, okay? All over this region, they're using cuneiform, okay? And you seem to have Araba appear around the time Habaru disappears, okay? Because once they're established as Israel here, nobody's calling them Hebrews anymore. They're calling them Hebrews in their scriptures, but publicly people understand like this is the kingdom of Israel, okay? Now your secular historians are going to say there is no kingdom of Israel, there was just, and we know there's Omri in the house of Omri, and it's like, well, yeah, because the house of Omri is the one who takes northern Israel and makes them big, and then marries them in with the Sidonians, and that's where Jezebel comes in, okay? So you're not going to have a lot of foreign records until they start marrying other people's sons and daughters and stuff like this, okay? The glory of Solomon's kingdom is starting to fade. They get sacked by the Egyptians after that, and that's when we start to have records outside of the region of these Israelites. Well, the reason you have this is because you have a collapse of all these kingdoms because of the Jews. So what happens is the Jews are coming in. They're taking all this land. The Egyptians almost become monotheistic, and then they try to have a revival and start erasing their records and just start denying that these Jews were there and kicking their butts and taking their names. They made them great, and then they destroyed them, okay? So they're not trying to prompt these people up, and they're not going to really have peace with them until Solomon marries in with them. You're not going to have any peace with them, but you're not going to have any interaction between the Jews and the Egyptians either. Remember, they came out of Egypt. They're ordered by God not to despise the Egyptians or attack them because they were guests there, right? And God's already done that for them, and then they're weakened. And then the sea peoples, which are primarily led by Danites, they're going to be attacking Egypt and the Hittites after that, okay? So they don't want the world to know that these Hebrew mountain nomad Hicks have been kicking their butt for hundreds of years. They're not putting this in their records, okay? These other kingdoms, Babylon is going to get overthrown again and again. The Mitanni are going to disappear, and the Hittites are going to disappear. So all the people that would have had records of the Israelites and their rise are gone. And these kingdoms are eventually going to get replaced by the Lydians over here, the Assyrians over here, and the Arameans over here. And then the Sidonians are going to kind of make a comeback because they become friendly with the Israelites, and that's when you start finding other records outside of them of the Israelites, okay? That's in the days of the house of Omri. So even though they're like well, we don't have any records of these Israelites. We don't believe they're there. They don't have much records of any of this other stuff either. It's not like we have all these very clear records about what are going on with the Assyrians and the Mitanni and the Egyptians. During the only people who have kind of a lot of history written down is the Egyptians, and we know they're historical revisionists. We know they're going to erase people that embarrass them. Okay? So you're going to have these guys, they're all using cuneiform, but you're going to have like 3 or 4 dynasties among the Babylonians before they eventually become an Assyrian vassal, and then you're going to have the Neo-Babylonian Empire that is going to rise in the days of Nebuchadnezzar, long after Israel starts appearing in the historical record. There is no real power. The Mitanni are going to fall, and they're eventually going to get replaced by the Aramaean kingdoms, and the Arameans are frenemies with Israel. Okay, so around the time that Omri starts appearing, that's when they rise. But before that, if you remember, David had a garrison there, so they were pinned down. So they didn't have a kingdom rising, and so they didn't have deep historical records because they don't really have a kingdom. Okay? And then the Hittites fall apart, and people, until literally the 1970s, denied that the Hittites exist. They also denied that the Trojans exist. Okay? So you want to take all this into account and realize these people who are denying the existence of Israel don't have good records on anything else either of this time period. The period that the Israelites are in Egypt and then coming out of Egypt, they call this period the Dark Ages, and the reason is because it's from the Tower of Babel. You have a Dark Ages going on here where we don't have good historical records. We have a bunch of wars and overthrows, and we can't even agree on what happened within 150 years. Okay? And that's all going on over here. Meanwhile, Egypt is totally stable around this time, except for this really obvious group of people who are right here where they say the Jews are, called the Hyksos, who apparently brought the chariot and the curved sword into Egypt. They started Egypt's sea trade, where Egypt's going to take over Cyprus and Crete, and they're going to start controlling the bronze trade. And you're going to have 2 main people controlling the bronze trade, which is going to be the Egyptians from here, and then the Hittites from the mountains here. They're going to get the copper and tin and have their bronze trade too. And that is going to last exactly until the Danites show up over here. They seem to sack Troy, which is a major Thracian trade city, I believe. And then they establish a city called Dardana, which means the generations of Dan, under a king named Phineas. And it's Phineas spelled just like the biblical Phineas, and Phineas is a Levite name. We know that because Phineas is a major priestly name, and we know the Levites are carrying around with them a priestly family that is based on the ancestors of Moses, or the descendants of Moses. Okay? So they've got this Dardana established up here, and then 10 years later they're going to sack Hattusa, and that's the end of the Hittite Empire. Okay, during this time, and I want to show you where this time period is, your Sea People's invasions start around 1200 BC. This is when the Egyptians are reporting on them. Okay, they didn't start then, but that's when the Egyptians are reporting on him. Now you're looking at 40 years before this. You have the Song of Deborah, reporting how the Danites wouldn't get off their ships and help them in their fight against the Canaanites. Okay? 40 years after that, the Egyptians are reporting the Sea People's invasions, and one of the main people groups are called the Denyen. Okay? Now, if you go to the Greek records, the name of the people of Dardana are called Dardanoi. Okay? Homer says the Danoi are basically these predecessor peoples to the Greeks and the Trojans. Okay, so King Pyrrhum, I think his name is King Pyrrhum of the I think his name is Pyrrhum. Pyrrhum, who's the king who, when Troy gets sacked in the movie Troy, he's from Dardana, so he seems to be a Danite. Also, Agamemnon and the Argives, which are the Argonauts, so the Spartans and the Argonauts are also descendants of Hercules, and he seems to be Samson. Okay, so what you have is 2 different groups of Danites. One is established in over here in Peloponnese, and the other's over here because they came at different times. Okay, Samson is going to be 100 years after these other Danites, and he's going to come over here and follow those other people, while the earlier Danites, who wouldn't get off their ships in the days of Deborah and Barak, they're going to take over Crete, and they're going to take over this. Okay, and what seems to be going on in the days of Agamemnon and Troy is a second Troy. a second sacking of Troy, because when we get to this is Tatian the Assyrian. This is going to be a guy who was trained by Justin Martyr. He is an Assyrian historian. He knows the mysteries. He knows the histories. And he's claiming that the testimony of the Phoenicians is that Menelaus, who sacks Troy in the Trojan Wars, is going to come and visit King Hiram, the same King Hiram who helped build Solomon's temple. Okay? The Phoenicians have this in their records. So he's saying, well, okay, they're saying that the Trojan War is much earlier, or the sack of Troy according to Homer. But Homer, they're saying, they think Homer was contemporary of when the sack of Troy really happened, which would have been closer to these days, which would have been around the year 1900. Okay? So what he's saying is there's something wrong with these records here, because they're saying it was years earlier, but we know that Solomon was 480 years after Moses, so their records are wrong. Okay? And we're saying based on Phoenician records, their records are wrong. Okay? And he's also citing that the Greeks learned writing from the Phoenicians. Homer is the oldest known writing we have of the Greeks, and they're saying the Greeks didn't learn to write till around the year 800. So by that time, Troy had been sacked multiple times, and what Homer seems to be doing is mixing multiple stories together. Well, what Homer doesn't seem to figure out is that they had these people called the Dardanoi and these people called the Danoi. Okay? So you literally have Danites and generation of the Danites. That's who they are. Okay? And they're the same people that the Egyptians are calling the Denyen, which are the Sea Peoples. Okay? They're one of the leading tribes of the Sea Peoples. The other ones seem to be Philistines and Tyre, and they're probably picking up other peoples who are joining them in their fleets. And remember, the Danites during this time, all they have is this little city of Dan, even though they were a big army coming into the land, and they're saying they can't find a place for themselves. So what they seem to do is they seem to sail away to go find a place for themselves. Okay? Now, you have these Hyksos people here in Egypt, and they would have been down here around this riverbed area. And they had canals that would take you right from Abaris, which is their capital city, right out here, and then they were the ones who started this trade that goes to Crete and Cyprus. Okay, remember, you're going to get copper here, you're going to get tin from Tarshish, and it's going to ship into Crete, and that's where they're going to make all the bronze and ship it around and control the bronze trade. And so because the Egyptians have control, that's why they're able to control all this, and their only competitors, the Hittites, who also have bronze, and so they can make tools and weapons fast like everybody else. Okay. And the early Danites, the ones who are in the days of Deborah and Barak, seem to cancel out this bronze economy here. The later Danites seem to be Samson in his 20-year gap cancels out this bronze economy here. And so that's where you get the Bronze Age collapse. Okay? And it's going to take place over about 100 years, and that's the exact same period from when Deborah starts complaining about the Danites not getting off their ships down to the days of Samson. Okay, so we're going to read the story of Samson. I'm going to show you how this makes sense, because Samson seems to kick the crap out of the Philistines, but in the immediate next generation, the Philistines are strong again. And my theory about why is because he's going to go to Crete, kick them out of Crete. They're going to be among the sea peoples trying to raid and invade and find a place to live, and they're ultimately going to go settle back and reinforce these Philistines here, and that's how they're going to be able to oppress the Jews the immediate generation after Samson destroys their temple and their lords. Okay? So that's a lot, but I hope you guys are understanding, like, these records line up if you just understand the Danites are the sea people and the Danoi and the Spartans and the Lacedaemonians. Lacedaemonians are just names for Spartans. Dardanelles, which is right next to Troy, which is where the second Trojan kingdom comes from, seems to be a rebuilt mixture of Thracians and Danites, and that becomes Troy too, and that's the story of Troy that Homer has. Okay, so let's just get into this and read what goes on after Deborah and Barak, because remember, you want to look at your timeline here. That first period from Joshua to Deborah and Barak, and then I believe is concurrent with them is Gideon and Abimelech. Okay. Is right here, and that's going to take you to around the 12th century BC. So you're going to look at a period of 230 years. That's a long time, okay? Remember, we've got a total of 480 years until from Moses to Solomon's temple, okay? And Josephus says it's 592 years, so that's a difference of 110 years. I can consider the possibility that I'm wrong here, but if I'm wrong here, the Bible is definitely wrong. Okay? Paul talks about these, there being 430 years that the Israelites are oppressed. There's different timelines, and there's ways these statements can line up, and there's ways they can't. But both me and Bishop Usher make this 480-year period work to make about 4,000 years between Adam and Christ, and also to align it up with most of the other historical dates. So I'm not relying on Usher. I'm doing my own independent research and then checking Usher, and Usher is always within a few years of what I get. Okay, and again, I'm not relying on these special ancient historical records. I'm relying on stuff that's available online and on Wikipedia, basically. So I'm reading old records, but I'm not coming up with any new special theories to figure out when the secular history is. I'm just lining it up with basically the same chronology Usher has and getting most of the same stuff, with the exception that Usher knew about the Hyksos, but he didn't think the Hyksos were the Hebrews. Okay? Well, again, the Egyptians are deliberately trying to make you think the Hyksos are some people that they kicked the crap out of, and they're not the Hebrews who kicked the crap out of them. Okay, so you have 230 years in this first period, and that's where we're going to get to Abimelech's attempt at being king of Israel, and he's a Manassite. He's half Manassite, half Shechemite, so he really is part Canaanite, part Israelite. Okay. And then you're going to have another about 100 and... I got to get the days of Solomon here, but about 200 years you're going to have until we get to King David's reign. Okay, so that kind of cuts the period in half. And in that first period, remember, they're beating the Canaanites, they're beating the Midianites, they're never going to have a problem with them. They beat the Kashites, they beat the Moabites, and then the Egyptians, because they've lost to the Hittites in Kadesh, in the Battle of Kadesh, they're not going to be a problem there either. So the Egyptians are never clashing with the Israelites during this period. They've got different friends and different enemies, and they just don't really get into it directly. Okay, I think that the Egyptians don't, because they know who the Jews are and they're not going to F with them. Okay, I think that's why Akhenaten is getting these letters from these people saying, help, the Habaru, and not doing anything about the Habaru and establishing monotheism instead. I think he knows who these people are. He knows everything they said they're going to do, they're doing. God is with them. I'm going to follow their God. And he knows what side of the line to get on. And then after he dies, Tutankhamun's like, screw this, glory of Egypt, and starts basically making up, I don't know what you want to call it, like, propaganda history, basically. Okay? So Battle of Kadesh is kind of it for them. Then they take out the Canaanites and the Midianites, and they've taken most of their land. The main enemies they're going to deal with, notice you have all these judges, but you don't have any enemy oppressing them. They have one come up from the Ammonites, and we're going to cover that. And then at the end of that, they're going to have the Philistines, and we're going to cover that. That's it for the second 200 years. So they really, and just so you see, the oppression here is only 18 years. The oppression here is 40 years. Okay, and then it's going to be during the successive terms of Samuel, Saul, and David that they're going to finish off the Philistines. Okay, so over the course of about 100 years, they're going to finish off the Philistines. Okay, so they're going to have Philistines are their main enemy during this time, this last century. They only have an 18-year period over this course of, again, this is about 150 years that they're dealing with any oppression. Okay. So once the Egyptians can't back up other Canaanites anymore, and the Hittites can't back up any other Canaanites anymore, remember, they're controlling the bronze trade. So they can't back these guys up with weapons anymore. Israel's free and clear, and it's all downhill from here. And the main people they have to deal with are the Philistines. And the Philistines are dealing with iron at this time. Okay, this is going to be the close of the Bronze Age and the start of the Iron Age. And so that's why it's a big deal that the Philistines have iron spears, because that's what they're going to come back with after they get thrown out of Crete. Okay, so let's see here. So we're in Judges 10, and we're going to get to Judges 16. This is just going to be 6 chapters, because if you remember, the story of Micah and the Danite priesthood, and then the story of the Benjamites almost being wiped out, takes place at the beginning of this history. They just have the books at the end, because those books were later added, it looks like, after the captivity. Okay? So Judges 16 is going to be where we close off with the story of Samson, and Samson's going to be a big deal because he is Hercules. Okay? So if we get to Judges 10, it says, after Abimelech there arose to defend Israel Tola, the son of Puah, the son of Dodo, a man of Issachar, who dwelt in Shamir of Mount Ephraim. So notice how you have all these people from other tribes, and they're all dwelling in Mount Ephraim. Remember, the Jews mostly have the highlands, and those other peoples are taking their time to take over these other lowlands, okay? So Tola is a man of Issachar, but he's from here, which means Issachar is not really taking over this like we had thought, right? He says he judged Israel 20 and 3 years, and he was buried in Shamir. Let's see where Shamir is. So Shamir is up here in Ephraim. He stays in Ephraim the whole time, and that's where he rules Israel from. And I used to think the Ephraimites were all of the kings of Israel, but I'm reading stuff that suggests that that Omri of the house of Ahab and all that stuff is actually from Issachar, not Ephraim. So we do seem to have a couple of guys from Issachar that are prominent in the Judges. Well, I guess we have so Barak is from Issachar and Tola is from Issachar. Okay, so the people of Issachar do seem to be prominent. Joshua's from Ephraim, Abdon is from Ephraim, but they seem to be who's prophesied to have the royal line. So we don't really know, because the records don't really tell us what tribes they're from. Okay. Anyways, it says he judged Israel 23 years and died, and he was buried in Shamir. After him rose Jair, a Gileadite, and he judged Israel for 22 years. So if you remember, Gilead is over here on the other side of the Jordan, but they're related to the Judahites, they're related to the Manassites, and they're kind of ballers. They kind of have a bunch of thug life gangsters living among them. He says he had 30 sons that rode on 30 ass colts, and they had 30 cities, which are in Havoth Jair to this day in the land of Gilead. So that's going to be over in here. Then Jair died, and he was buried in Kamon. Let's see where Kamon is. So Kamon is in Gilead here. So this is the region southeast of the Dead Sea. So that's where Jesus is going to go later and cast out the legion out of that guy. Okay, it's in this area of Gilead. Okay, now remember, the Gileadites are going to take over largely the Mount Hermon region in that region of Og, king of Bashan, which is where the Nephilim come from. So is it a coincidence that Legion and all these demonic shades are inhabiting that region? I don't think it is. I tend towards the belief that theory has some legitimacy to it. But again, I don't really have that authoritatively from Scripture, so don't try to fight it with anyone over it. So it says, the Israel did evil again in the sight of the Lord and served Baalim. So notice they're going to have about 40 years where they're going to be okay, and then they're going to go back to idol worship again. So basically one generation that's good, okay? They served Baalim and Ashtaroth and the gods of Syria and the gods of Zidon. Now remember, at this time, the Mitanni are falling apart, and the Syrians, whenever you see Syrians, you're going to see Aram, okay? So the Arameans, who we now call Syrians, are starting to rise up because the Mitanni are gone and the Kashite Empire is falling apart, and they're going into civil war down in lower Mesopotamia. So they're worshiping the gods of Syria, the gods of Zidon, South Sidon, the gods of Moab, the gods of the children of Ammon, the gods of the Philistines, and forsook not the Lord and served them. So they're incorporating all the idolatry from all the nations all around them. And I'm not going to get into all these different idols and who they are, but basically you're going to have Baal and Ashtoreth, and then versions of Baal and Ashtoreth, and then other gods that are based on stars and stuff like that among these people, and then really just corruptions of them and Nimrod and stuff like that just keep regurgitating themselves in different languages, okay? And it says, and the anger of the Lord was hot against Israel, and he sold them into the hands of the Philistines and into the hands of the Ammon, okay? So this second period, I want you to note this, he's selling them in the hands of the Philistines and Ammon. Remember, the Philistines never really stopped being a problem for the Israelites after this until David. Okay, and he says, in that year they vexed and oppressed the children of Israel 18 years. 18 years the children of Israel were on the other side of the Jordan in the land of the Amorites, which is in Gilead. Now listen to this. 18 years, all the children of Israel that were on the other side of the Jordan in the land of Amorites, which is in Gilead. Okay? So basically, it looks like the Philistines, remember, they have the lowlands, and then the Ammonites are teaming up to oppress Israel over here. Okay? Moreover, the children of Ammon passed over the Jordan to fight also against Judah and against Benjamin and against the house of Ephraim. Okay? Now, your scholars are going to try to tell you that Judah didn't exist, they weren't a kingdom, and the reason is they're going to say that the Song of Deborah and Barak is calls on all these Israelite tribes, and it doesn't mention Judah. Well, no, it doesn't mention Judah because Judah's on the other side of the mountains from them. Okay, there's whole mountain ranges in between them and Judah, and they're fighting over the lowlands of northern Israel. Okay. Judah at that time is probably supporting Gideon against the Midianites. Okay, it doesn't really say who, but it says Gideon gets all these people, and then after he wins with his 300, he gets a bunch of people to go with him. Okay, and that's Manassites, but the Judahites seem to be mostly holding their land, but we also know they're oppressed by the Philistines, and they have a problem with them the whole time. Okay, so it's not reasonable for them to be calling on the Judahites to go over the mountains to fight this battle so that the Philistines can come take over all their territory in the south. Okay, that's just not going to happen. So anyways, the children of Ammon passed over the Jordan to fight against Judah and Benjamin and against the house of Ephraim, so that Israel was distressed. Okay, so the Ammonites, let's look at these Ammonites here. They're right here. Okay, notice you have the Moabites, the Ephraimites, and then you have Ammon, and Reuben's taken territory that used to belong to them. It was first taken from them by Og, king of Bashan, and now Reuben's taken it over, okay? And so it says, and the children of Israel cried out to the Lord, saying, we have sinned against thee, both because we have forsaken our God and also served the Baalim. So they're getting their butts kicked by the Ammonites and the Philistines now. And the Lord said to the children of Israel, did I not deliver you from the Egyptians and from the Amorites and from the children of Ammon and from the Philistines? The Zidonians also and the Amalekites and the Maonites did oppress you, and you cried unto me, and I delivered you out of their hand. Now, Origen's going to say the Moabites are the Moabites. He's wrong. There is actually a city called Maon. Okay, so this apparently is a different tribe. We don't really know where they originated from, but if they were part of this coalition that involved Midianites and Amalekites that Gideon was fighting. Okay. He said, they oppressed you, and you cried to me, and I delivered them out of your hand, or I delivered you out of their hand. Yet you have forsaken me and served other gods, wherefore I will deliver you no more. So notice it's the Lord saying this. It doesn't say who the prophet is, who he's saying this through. I'm assuming he's not shouting at them directly. But he says, go and cry unto the gods you have chosen, and let them deliver you in the time of your tribulation. And the children of Israel said to the Lord, we have sinned. Do thou unto us whatever seems good to thee. Deliver us, we pray thee, this day. And they put away the strange gods from among them and served the Lord, and his soul was grieved for the misery of Israel. So they repented, and God's like, okay, now I'm going to feel sorry for you. And the children of Ammon were gathered together and encamped in Gilead, and the children of Israel assembled themselves together and camped in Mizpah. And the children and princes of Gilead said to one another, what man is he that will begin to fight against the children of Ammon? He will be head over all the inhabitants of Gilead. Okay, so remember, the main place they're oppressing them, yes, they're coming into Judah here. Remember, Judah has all these lowlands here. Okay, so this is where their farms and herds are going to be in a lot of cases, and they're going to go, the Philistines and the Ammonites are going through here, and they're going up here. Okay, so that's what you've got going on. They seem to have an alliance, or they just happen to be both at the same time oppressing Israel. So probably more the Philistines oppressing down here, the Ammonites oppressing down here and up here. Okay? And so they're saying, we need a leader. Who's going to be our leader? And God says, oh, you put away your idols, I'll get you another judge. How's that sound? And they're like, okay, deal. And so Jephthah, the Gileadite, was a mighty man of valor, and he was the son of a harlot. So here's another bastard like Abimelech, okay? And Gilead begat Jephthah, okay? So this is probably not the Gilead, because basically they're saying he's a descendant of Gilead, okay? it says, and Gilead's wife bare him sons, and his wife's son grew up, and they thrust out Jephthah and said to him, thou shalt not inherit our father's house. So, for thou art a son of a strange woman. Okay, so maybe this is the Gilead. Let's see. So Gilead is mentioned as early as Genesis, but those seem to be later edits. Machir, it says, begat Gilead, and of Gilead come the family of the Gileadites. So Machir is going to be the son of Manasseh, so that's third generation from Manasseh. So this definitely is not the Gilead. What it seems to be is that it's a descendant of Gilead, and they're just saying Gilead. Okay, so when they say Gilead begot him, that means he was begotten by a Gileadite, probably a prominent Gileadite, and he may have even been named Gilead after the original Gilead. Okay, but he was a bastard. He was the son of a concubine, and he was not of them. So his brothers said, get out of here. We're not going to be your friends, and you're not going to have any inheritance with us. And he went and dwelt in the land of Tob. And he said, and there were vain men gathered to Jephthah and went out with him. So just like Abimelech is a thug, and he's got thugs running around with him, kind of outcasts, gangsters, so does Jephthah, okay? Now they're in this place called Tob. And Tob is going to be out here a ways, okay? So think of Tob as like, here's a river that is going to flow down and join the Jordan. They're at the headwaters of that river. That's where Tob is, okay? So this is about as far away as you can get from Israel and still be connected to them by this river. This river is going to become a tributary that goes and flows into, it's called the Yarmouk River, that is going to eventually flow into the Jordan River, okay? So you see Ashtaroth up here and Golan. This is where the Gileadites control, and this guy is on the outskirts. He is a hillbilly to hillbillies, okay? Nobody likes him. He's basically that guy who's going to be a hunter, and he's going to sleep around, and he's going to drink, and he's going to hunt, and people are going to think he's cool, but he's not civilized, okay? He's not a civilized guy, and sometimes when you're getting your butts kicked by Ammonites, an uncivilized guy is just what the situation calls for. And so they go to Jephthah. And it came to pass in the process of time that the children of Ammon made war against Israel. And it was so that when the children of Ammon made war against Israel, the elders of Gilead went to fetch Jephthah from the land of Tob. And they're like, we know this guy. And they're like, he's uncivilized. He's a gangster. He's a thug. And they're like, sometimes the situation calls for a thug. We need to go get Jephthah. He's living the thug life. He is going to take out Ammon. So they said to Jephthah, come, be our captain, that we may fight with the children of Ammon. Like, we want you to lead us. Why? You took a ragtag bunch of thugs from various tribal affiliations and bastards and stuff like that, and you made them into like a troop, like a mercenary troop in an army. So we know you know how to lead. So we want you to take our ragtag, been beat up for years, Israelites, and make an army out of them. We believe in you. And Jephthah said to the elders of Gilead, did you not hate me and expel me out of my father's house? And why are you come to me now that you are in distress? And the elders of Gilead said to Jephthah, therefore we turn again to thee now, that thou mayest go fight with us and fight against the children of Ammon, and be our head over all the inhabitants of Gilead. In other words, we will make you the leader, basically the chieftain over all the Gileadites, okay? And the Gileadites are kind of a sub-tribe in Israel, okay? They're not the whole of the half-tribe of Manasseh, but they are the dominant clans of the half-tribe of Manasseh. So it's almost like saying we're going to put you over the whole half-tribe of Manasseh, okay? And Jephthah said to the elders of Gilead, if you bring me home again to fight against the children of Ammon, and the Lord deliver them before me, shall I be your head? And the elders of Gilead said to Jephthah, the Lord be witness between us if we do not do according to thy words. Then Jephthah went with all the elders of Gilead, and the people made him a head and captain over them. And Jephthah uttered these words before the Lord in Mizpah. And Jephthah sent messengers to the king of the children of Ammon, saying, what hast thou to do with me, that thou art come against me to fight in my land? And the king of the children of Ammon answered to the messengers of Jephthah, because Israel took away my land when they came up out of Egypt, from Arnon even to Jabbok, and now to Jordan. Now therefore restore the lands again peaceably. And Jephthah sent messengers again to the king of the children of Ammon, and he said to him, thus saith Jephthah, Israel took not away the land of Moab, nor the land for the children of Ammon. See, the Lord told us specifically not to take your land. But when Israel came up out of Egypt and walked through the wilderness to the Red Sea and came to Kadesh, remember there's Red Sea, and then there's a Kadesh down here in the south. Then Israel sent messengers to the king of Edom, saying, "Let me, I pray thee, pass through my land." But the king of Edom would not hearken thereto. And in like manner they sent the king of Moab, but he would not consent. And Israel abode in Kadesh. So we stayed down here in Kadesh, man. Then we went along through the wilderness and encompassed the land of Edom. We walked all the way around. We took the scenic route because you guys wouldn't let us walk through your land. And the land of Moab, and came by the east side of the land of Moab, and pitched on the other side of Arnon, but came not within the border of Moab. For Arnon was the border of Moab. Okay? Now I want you guys to see stuff like this when you study the Bible and understand how detailed he is going into what is also said in the book of Numbers and the book of Deuteronomy. Okay? This is how we know this is a consistent record. Your scholars are going to come and say this was written in the Second Temple period, this was written in the Babylonian captivity, this was written in the days of Josiah, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, if these guys are writing this stuff to be scandalous, boy, they sure know how to tell a lot of stories where they keep telling the same history again and again and again and again and again, to the point where it's so redundant it's boring. Okay? They keep telling the same history, all these different characters and all these stories that were written over different times. And you know what you never find in any of these historical accounts? Anything from the book of Enoch, anything from the book of Jasher, any of these other stories that appear in these other books. You don't find a hint of them in these books. But where you do find hints of them is in secular history. Okay? So you need to learn these details so that when you deal with people, whether they're Christians in the church who just don't believe the Bible is literal, or they're unbelievers who have been sold by the world into thinking the Bible's not literal, you can show them these things. And you can go, look, here's what they said happened. Here's this battle happened. Notice how they keep telling the same story in the same way in the story. Okay? In order for you to do this, you have to fudge everything. Okay? You have to fudge all the records. But there's too many different stories within the records that if you pulled them out, it would make the record make no sense at all to say that they wrote all these different records after the fact. Why would you do that? Why would you do it in that way? It's too choppy. It's too... You clearly have that this book was compiled with a bunch of different records and put together, and those different records all seem to agree with each other as to the history. Okay? We don't have any records that disagree. You can have a couple numbers here and there that disagree, and a genealogy here and there that disagree, but you can account for it in a reasonable way. It's not something that's like, okay, clearly there's 100 different years here. It's not like where you get the book of Tobit and they say Nebuchadnezzar was the king of Assyria and took the Jews to captivity in Nineveh. Okay? That's off by 100 years, and that's the wrong people. Okay? So that's how we know that's bullcrap, and none of this is like that. Okay? Even little things like this king Kushan, what's his name? Okay? Seems to be at the same time where there's a Kassite or Kushite dynasty that has come back in Babylon. And these little historical records like the Hittites, remember, until the 1970s, your seculars did not believe the Hittites exist. Until the early 1900s, they didn't believe Troy exists because it was only in Homer. Okay? Then they find Troy. Then they find the Hittites, and they go, these old ancient historical records might not be so crazy after all. And now they're getting more of this stuff, and they're translating to English and going, oh, we're actually making sense of this stuff and pulling it together, and the archaeology seems to match. And then all of a sudden they discover Göbekli Tepe, and they're like, that, according to our precise archaeological dating methods, is 6,500 years older than Sumeria, which is the oldest civilization we've been telling people existed for the last 200 years. And now we find something that is very sophisticated, very big, and it's 6,500 years older than that, and we've been telling people that pottery wasn't even invented for another 4,000 years, okay? Your secular historians are at a loss right now rewriting ancient history. And if you know the university system, if you know archaeological circles, you know that these people are at a complete loss trying to come up with propaganda for this stuff, and that's why Klaus Schwab and the gang took over Göbekli Tepe and shut it down, because they're coming up with the propaganda, and they're going to come out and tell that official history of what really happened somewhere around the New World Order. Okay? Because they don't know. They don't know. They will not admit the flood. But we just found this big civilization that seems to be buried in mud and then dug back up and then buried in mud again on purpose. What the heck happened? I don't know. Maybe there was a pre-flood civilization, and then Noah's sons dug it up and used it for a while. And then she said, you know what? There's too much pagan stuff here that we need to keep buried, and they just buried it. And we're going to spread out throughout the earth, and we're not going to relive the past. Which is kind of what the Bible says. So, it says, Israel sent messengers to Sihon, king of the Amorites, the king of Heshbon, and Israel said to him, so Sihon, king of Amorites, the king of Heshbon. Let's see where Heshbon is. So this is Sihon. This is their first go through, okay? And they said, let me pass through my place. And Sihon said, no. He's an Amorite, okay? He said, no. Og, king of Bashan, he's a Nephilim. Sihon is just an Amorite, okay? And Sihon trusted not in Israel to pass through his coast, but Sihon gathered all his people together and pitched at Jahaz and fought against Israel. And the Lord God delivered Sihon and all his people to the hand of Israel, and they smote them. They smote the crap out of them, okay? And so Israel possessed all the land of the Amorites and the inhabitants of that country, and they possessed all the coasts of the Amorites, and Arnon even unto Jabbok, and the wilderness even unto Jordan. So this was an Ammonite territory when we got here, okay? This was Amorite territory when we got here, and if they took it from you some hundreds of years earlier, well, that's their problem. So now, Lord God of Israel has dispossessed the Amorites from before his people Israel. Should thou possess it? Are we supposed to give it to you now that we took it from the Amorites? Wilt thou possess that which he said, wilt not thou possess that which Chemosh, thy God, has given you to possess? In other words, your God hasn't given you this land, otherwise the Amorites wouldn't have taken it. So you should be satisfied with what your God has given you. So whomever the Lord our God shall drive out from before us, them we will possess. Now remember, they believe that these gods are over the nations, okay? And so they're saying there's a bunch of different gods, and our God is tops. And if your God wants you to have more land, he would have given you more land. You would have taken it from the Amorites, but you haven't, so don't think you're going to take it from us. And now, art thou any better than King Balak, the son of Zippor, the king of Moab? Remember that guy? Did he ever strive against Israel? Did he ever fight against them? Remember Balak? Balak was the guy who hired Balaam. No, he did not. Why? Because Balaam told him these people are blessed by God, leave them alone. While Israel dwelt in Heshbon and in her towns, and in Aurora and in her towns, and in all the cities that be along the coast of the Arnon 300 years, why therefore did you not recover them at that time? In other words, you have not made a peep about this being your land for 300 years, okay? Now let's do our math. These people, oh man, these records are just cobbled together, they don't make any sense. Well, these guys are way better at making false records make sense than the Egyptians are then, because the Egyptians, or the Babylonians, because you can't nail that down to 150 years, and you can't nail the Egyptian records down, and you have all these disagreements and agreements over whether they're a joint rule or a co-rule, or whether they're two different kingdoms or one kingdom. You guys can't figure this out. Why? Because apparently, of all of the people who will go around forging records, the Israelites are just way better at it because they're consistent, or because it's real history, okay? Now let's look at this. 300 years, he says, okay? So here's Tola, here's Jair, here's Jephthah. That's 1166 BCE. Joshua goes in there 20 years before. Remember, he dies at 110. That's 1431, so 20 years before. So that's 1451 to Jephthah, 1166, okay? Do you see how close this is? It's like 280, 290 years, but he rounds it up to 300 years, okay? Well, that's because Moses was before that, and it was during that 40 years of captivity, towards the end of it, that they took that land, okay? So he's ballparking. It's about 280, 290 years, but we're saying 300 years just to be roundabout. And you go through all these records that people say were made up after the fact, and this guy says, hasn't it been ours for 300 years? And lo and behold, you add up all the numbers, even though you're putting these later records after the fact and you're placing these over here, and you go, oh, that's interesting. That and that happened right around here, and that is almost exactly 300 years. And so this guy spitballs and says, you've had 300 years to complain. The time of the what is it called? The statute of limitations on you making that claim is over. Thus saith I. Okay? And so, wherefore I have not sinned against thee, but thou doest me wrong to war against me. The Lord the judge, be judge. So Yahweh the judge, who's the judge of all the earth, be judge this day between the children of Israel and the children of Ammon. In other words, I'm appealing to God. I'm appealing to God, the Most High God. And if you're right, well, I guess you'll beat us in this fight. How you like me now, okay? Howbeit the king of the children of Ammon hearkened not to the words of Jephthah, which he sent him. And the Spirit of the Lord came upon Jephthah, and he passed over Gilead and Manasseh, and he passed over Mizpah of Gilead, and Mizpah of Gilead he passed over unto the children of Ammon. So he went from up here, down here, all the way down to here. Let's do this. And then Jephthah vowed a vow, and the Lord said, if thou shalt without fail deliver the children of Ammon into mine hands, then it shall be that whatsoever cometh forth from the doors of my house to meet me when I return in peace from the children of Ammon shall surely be the Lord's, and I will offer it up for a burnt offering. Dang. He already told you he was going to give you victory. But the Spirit came upon him when he says this. What's going on here? So Jephthah passed over unto the children of Ammon to fight against them, and the Lord delivered them into his hands, and he smote them from a roar, even till he came to Minnith, even 20 cities, and unto the plain of the vineyards, and a very great slaughter, and thus the children of Ammon were subdued before the children of Israel. And Jephthah came to Mizpah to his house, and behold, his daughter came out to meet him with timbrels and dances, and she was his only child. Besides her, he had neither son nor daughter. So this guy is a merc with one daughter, probably from a prostitute. And she comes out, yay, Dad, you won. I got some dance moves and some tambourines. Let's do this. And he's like, oh, but my vow. And it came to pass when he saw her, he rent his clothes, and he said, alas, my daughter, thou hast brought me very low, for thou art one of them that trouble me, for I have opened my mouth unto the Lord. I cannot go back. Now, people are going to say, did he offer his daughter up as a burnt offering? I don't think he did. And here's why. There's some very prominent things in the law about offering up your children as burnt sacrifices, okay? We don't do this. And by the way, this guy seems to know records going all the way back to Moab, to Moses, to Balak and Beor, which means he's reading his scriptures. He knows his history. He knows his scriptures. Okay? So is this guy going to go offer up his daughter as a burnt sacrifice? No. What he's going to do is he's going to offer up her up to basically serve in the temple as a perpetual virgin. Okay? That's how he would keep that vow without actually burning his daughter alive and breaking the law. Okay? And she said to him, my father, if thou hast opened my mouth to the Lord, do to me according to that which is proceeded out of thy mouth. For as much as the Lord has taken vengeance for me of thine enemies, even the children of Ammon. She said unto her father, let this thing be done for me. Let me alone for 2 months, that I might go up and down in the mountains and bewail my virginity, I and my fellows. Okay? Not bewail the fact that I'm going to be burned alive, but bewail my virginity. So what is he doing? You are sacrificed, just like you have Samuel's mom say, if I get a son, I'm going to offer him up to the Lord. He's going to serve in the priesthood. He's going to be a servant to the priesthood. Okay? That's how you offer up your child to the Lord. You don't burn them alive. Okay? We frown on this kind of thing here. Okay? And he said, go, and he sent her away for 2 months. And she went with her companions and bewailed her virginity on the mountains. And it came to pass at the end of 2 months, she returned to her father, who did to her according to his vow, which he had vowed, and she knew no man. Okay? That's what he fulfilled, is that she was a virgin forever. She's given up. Okay? And it was a custom in Israel that the daughters of Israel went yearly to lament the daughter of Jephthah the Gilead 4 days in a year. Okay? So, are they lamenting and mourning her? Did he burn her alive? Based on the text, in the text alone, you could go either way with this. Now, the sayings that they say that everyone in Israel did what was right in their own eyes, those are only in those latter stories of Micah and the story of Benjamin almost being wiped out, okay? That's not being said here. So it says he did with her according to his vow, which he vowed, and she knew no man, okay? Now, if she's a young virgin, we already know she's a virgin, she's a virgin, she's a virgin, but they seem to keep pointing out that she stays a virgin, okay? So it seems to be that he's given her to the priesthood as a virgin temple servant, okay? And it was a custom in Israel. Why? Because we can find people in Samuel in the next generation, and we find virgins that are given to the temple because the priest's sons are sleeping with them. And it's a huge offense, and they lose the priesthood for that. So we know that that's a custom. So how do these girls end up serving the priesthood like that? Well, probably similar vows, or people, maybe they're poor and they can't afford this daughter. Nobody wants to marry him because they're a butterface, and they say, well, they'll serve the priesthood. So they're kind of like nuns. Okay? That the daughters of Israel went yearly to lament the daughter of Jephthah. The fact that she was not able to have children against her will is something you could lament, but that would be the biggest evidence that he would have actually killed her. I don't believe he killed his daughter. I don't believe that's what this is saying. I believe he made the vow, and the vow was that she was given over to the priesthood as a virgin, basically. Okay? So that's how I interpret that. If I was preaching, that's how I would teach that. I would not teach that he burned his daughter alive. I realize that preaches a good story, but he was filled with the Spirit of God when he made the vow, it says. The Lord gave him victory. The Lord obviously was sovereign over his daughter coming out to meet him. I don't think the Lord is setting this guy up to burn his child alive against the law. So there you go. So and the men of Ephraim gathered themselves together. Now listen to this. Listen to how grateful the Ephraimites are, okay? Now the Ephraimites haven't really been oppressed by the Ammonites. You've had the Judites oppressed by the Philistines, probably with Ammonites helping them, and the Ammonites oppressing the Reubenites and the Gileadites and trying to get their land back, okay? They haven't really messed with Ephraim. They have crossed the Jordan to mess with Judah, but they haven't really messed with Ephraim. So what's going on here? Well, the Ephraimites like to talk crap, and apparently they don't like these half-breed, half-Aramean Gileadites, okay? And he said, "Wherefore passest thou over to fight against the children of Ammon, and didn't call us to go with thee? We will burn thine house with thee with fire." You're going to burn my house down for defeating the enemies of Israel? And Jephthah said unto them, "I and my people were at great strife." Remember how they tried to do this to Gideon too, right? Hey, why didn't you bring us to fight after the fact, right? Why? You got to give us some of those spoils of war. We don't. These Ephraimites are no good. Of course they're not. They're eventually going to become idol worshippers. Jephthah said to them, "I and my people were at great strife with the children of Ammon, and when I called you, you delivered me not out of their hands." In other words, we called you and you didn't come. Don't act offended now, okay? "And when I saw that you delivered me not, I put my life in my hands and passed over against the children of Ammon, and the Lord delivered them into my hands. Wherefore then are ye come up to me in this day to fight against me?" And Jephthah gathered together all the men of Gilead and fought with Ephraim, and the men of Gilead smote Ephraim, because they said, "You Gileads are fugitives of Ephraim among the Ephraimites and among the Manassites." In other words, remember the Manassites and the Ephraimites are brothers, okay? And the Gileadites are half Aramean. And they're saying, "We don't like you. You're fugitives among us." In other words, if we see any of you among us, you're dead. And so the Gileadites took the passages of Jordan, so right here, before the Ephraimites, and it was so that those Ephraimites which were escaped said, "Let me go over," that the men of Gilead said to him, "Are you an Ephraimite?" And they say, "Nay." And they said unto him, "Say now Shibboleth." And he said Shibboleth, and he said Sibboleth, for he could not frame to pronounce it right. Okay? Now, you're asking, how are these guys all Israelites and they can't pronounce the same word? Well, the answer is because the Gileadites are married in with the Arameans. And so they speak kind of differently. And if you've ever gone to Israel and you've talked with a West Bank guy or an Israelite, they say some stuff that they pronounce it kind of weird. They say some stuff, honestly, the way they pronounce it sounds kind of gay to me. But it's just the way they talk, okay? Well, look at this. Say Shibboleth and they say Thibboleth. They can't say it right, okay? That's literally how they sound over there. They say Thibboleth. Well, who sounds like that hangs out in San Francisco in nightclubs? Well, we know who sounds like that. That's how they sound. Why do they sound that way? Well, it just so happens those people that are on the other side are mixed with the Arabs that are around them, and apparently they pronounce their S's a bit different. Okay? And so you have these half Aramean Manassites, and then the Ephraimites and the other Manassites that aren't Aramean, they're more Jewish purebred. And he says he couldn't pronounce it right. And so they took him and slew him at the passes of Jordan, and fell at that time of the Ephraimites 42,000. They killed 42,000 Ephraimites between war and between preventing them from crossing the Jordan. In other words, these Ephraimites called them out and said, "You're fugitives in Ephraim and Manasseh." In other words, "We see you over here, you're dead." And of course, there's Manassites over here, and they said, "Fine, if we see you over here, you're dead." and they ended up killing 42,000 of the Ephraimites. Okay, that's a lot of Ephraimites dead. And Jephthah judged Israel 6 years. So 42,000, that's a lot of dead guys. So their armies are shrunk down. And so you're not going to hear about the Ephraimites being much after this, okay? You're going to see one other Ephraimite that reigns for 8 years, and then you're not really going to hear about the Ephraimites until you get to after Solomon's reign, okay? So you're going to have about another 100 or so years that the Ephraimites are not going to talk crap to anyone because they've had their butts handed to them a bit. So Jephthah judged Israel 6 years. Then Jephthah died. The Gileadite died and was buried in one of the cities of Gilead. Okay? He has no kids. That's it. He delivers Israel, sacrifices his daughter to perpetual virginity, and that's it. That's it. He dies 6 years later. So he's probably not so young at this time. Okay? After him, Ibzan of Bethlehem judged Israel. Ibzan of Bethlehem. So we don't know if Ibzan he's not in the Bible anywhere else. We assume because he's from Bethlehem, he's a Judahite. But we don't know because they call Bethlehem, Judah. So we know it's a city of Judah. We know from Chronicles who Bethlehem, the Ephraimite, comes from. Okay, Bethlehem is a person. Ephrathah is like his ancestor, and Ephrathah is going to be a descendant of Judah. Okay, but we also know that other people live in Bethlehem that are Levites. I don't think it's one of the cities that Levites were given. I don't believe it is. So Ephrath, Bethlehem is where Rachel was buried. You only have Bethlehem mentioned as a city of, so there's another Bethlehem, okay? When Judah is given their territory, you don't really have a Bethlehem mentioned, and this is going to be the first mention of Bethlehem outside of Genesis, and we know Genesis was added to later, okay, or updated, the cities were updated later, okay? So we know Isban judged Israel for 30 years. He had 30 sons and 30 daughters who he sent abroad and took in 30 daughters from abroad for his sons, and he judged Israel 7 years. So I would assume abroad means from the other tribes of Israel. So Isban is going to judge Israel for 7 years, and he's going to have 30 sons and daughters and marry in with all the other tribes, and he was going to be a powerful lord in Israel for 7 years. Then died Ibzan, and he was buried in Bethlehem. So you kind of notice you have this Bethlehemite tribe, or Bethlehemite family, who's married in with all these other families for Israel. So you're kind of setting up a future kind of an aristocracy that is loyal to Bethlehem, and that's where David's going to come from. Okay, so that's something that seems to be pretty ordained, right? And then it says, after him, Elon, a Zebulunite, judged Israel, and he judged Israel 10 years. So this thing is a big deal because he is making strategic marriages for his 30 sons and 30 daughters among all the tribes of Israel. But it doesn't say, like Ibzan. Let's see if there's anything like Bethlehem. We know David is from Bethlehem. So Ephrathah is a father of, let's see, so Caleb, the son of Hur. And there's going to be multiple Calebs in the line of Judah, okay? And so you have, remember I told you the Manites? The son of Shabbai was Man, the father of Bethzur. I think that's a different one. So they're going to be descended from Hezron. And Hezron is going to be the oldest son of Pharez, okay? If you remember Pharez and Zerah with the two kids who are born and the red thread and all that, you're going to have Hezron and Zerah, and then Hezron is going to be a descendant of him, is going to be this Caleb, and this Caleb is going to have this Ephrathah, and Ephrathah is going to have a grandson named Bethlehem. The son of Salma is Bethlehem, and the Netophathites, Adaroth, and the house of Joab. So Joab is going to be David's, I think it's general. And the half of the Manethathites, the Zorites, and the family of the scribes which dwell at Jabez. So the prayer of Jabez, the family of the scribes where Jabez comes from, is actually related to these Bethlehemites, okay? But you don't have, so notice you have Jabez and then you have Isban, I don't think they're the same guy. You don't have any mention of this Isban. So he's Isban of Bethlehem, and Bethlehem goes down here, and you have the Netophathites, Adaroth, Manathites, and the Zorites. So these are 4 families that come from Bethlehem. But remember, this Isban married in with all these different families. So Bethlehem is very well connected because of Isban. And we don't really know anything after that, okay? Now, after them, they had Elon Musk, the Zebulonite, and he judged Israel, and he judged them for 10 years. Now, Zebulon is up here. He says Elon the Zebulonite died, and he was buried in Aijalon in the country of Zebulon. So let's see where Aijalon is. So there seems to be multiple Aijalons because Zebulon's up here, okay? There's an Aijalon, it seems to be in just south of Judah. And maybe that's how they would get to their land. So, no, I don't think. You see Zebulon, Megiddo. I don't see where Aijalon is. So the Ayalon Valley today is, you see this train, it's running from Jerusalem to Tel Aviv. That's where the Ayalon Valley is, and you see all these farms there, so he's somewhere around here, okay? I actually never went to northern Israel when I visited, but that is really pretty country right there. With mountains and plains and trains running through it. It says, so after him, Abdon, the son of Hillel, a Pirathonite, judged Israel, and he had 40 sons and 40 daughters. So a Pirathonite is apparently from Ephraim. So 2 Samuel says, mentions a Benaiah, the Pirathonite. 1 Chronicles mentions a Pirathonite, Netophathite. So apparently one of David's men are Benaiah, the Pirathonite of the children of Ephraim. That's how we know he's an Ephraimite, okay? So Hillel, the Pirathonite, was a judge for a while. He was a boss for 8 years. And then we get to Samson, okay? So I want you to notice all these people. You just have Jephthah. Remember, for 18 years, the Ammonites are oppressing them because they're worshiping idols, and that's their problem. Okay, and that's the only oppression they have, but this whole 100-year period around that, they don't have any oppression, okay? So you have a ballpark of, 80 years, 85 years that they don't really have any oppression. But if you remember, when the Philistines oppressed them, nobody ever delivered them from the Philistines, okay? Jephthah delivers them from the Ammonites in the east, but nobody delivers them from the Philistines in the west. So this entire time, from way up here, you're going to have a Judahite, a Zebulonite, and an Ephraimite, and they're judging from the highlands of Judah and from basically from the lowlands of Manasseh and Zebulun and East Manasseh and West Manasseh. But nobody's really dealing with the Philistines yet, okay? The Philistines are still there. They've been strong pretty much ever since the Egyptians rebuilt them in the days of Ehud, okay? Tutankhamun seems to reinforce them after Ehud kills 600 of them. The Egyptians pull out, but the Philistines are still there. And I would expect the Philistines keep getting stronger because during this time, the sea peoples are kicking them out of the islands where they are, okay? So they're probably kicking them out of Cyprus. They probably haven't kicked them out of Crete yet, okay? But these Philistines, we know they leave and they're parts of the sea peoples. Remember, this is a generic term. Just like Hyksos is a term for these hillbillies up here. The sea peoples are a term for the pirate raiders who come in, okay? And they're going to talk about these different tribes, and sometimes they're working together because they have common goals, but they're not necessarily one people. They just call them the sea peoples, okay? And so you're probably having sea peoples that are reinforcing the Philistines this whole time. They're trying to keep some trade going with Crete, which is where you're getting bronze from. And you don't really have them kicked out of Crete yet, okay? So we know this Dardana is here because these Dardanians are right here. Here's Troy. They sack it on their way in to go inland and take Hattusa. Remember, the Danites are a big army. They're an army of 60K when they go into Israel. By the time they get to the time of David, some 500 years later, they're half that, which means with all their population growth and all their avoiding wars with Israel, they're still only half the size. Why? Because apparently that big army mostly left, and they set up Dardanus here. Okay? And this is probably not the only thing they set up, but they take Troy and set up Dardanus, and they eventually become part of the royal line that becomes Troy too, which is going to be sacked in the Trojan Wars that we know from Homer. Okay? But they set up this, they go and land, and they take Hattusa. Okay? Or at least they're part of a coalition that overthrows Hattusa. Okay? We know that there's Semitic Lydians here. Maybe they're allying with them. We're not sure. But we know these Dardana here that means the generations of Dan, or the house of Dan, basically. And their first king is named Phineas, which is a Levite name. Okay? So after this, we're going to get to Samson. Okay? Now it says, the children of Israel did evil again in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord was delivered to them in the hands of the Philistines 40 years. So assume that this is mostly the Judahites. Notice the Judahites are largely staying out of stuff. We do have this one Judahite who is a judge and marries in with a bunch of different, all the different tribes, but it's only for 7 years. Okay? And then you're going to have an Ephraimite and Manassite and a Zebulonite rule. Okay? So this is probably mostly dealing with the Danites and with the Judahites, because they're the only ones mentioned here. And the Philistines, that's mostly where their territory is. Remember, Zebulun, they had a strong leader up in the north, and they've defeated the Canaanites, and so northern Israel is getting kind of strong at this point, and the Philistines don't seem to be stepping. Okay, their Egyptian allies have been in decline. They're not really going to ever make a real comeback. The next time you see the Egyptians offer help to anybody, they do sack Jerusalem once during the days of Rehoboam, and then just leave. And they offer help to the Israelites when the Assyrians are coming at them, because they're enemies with the Assyrians, because they want to get Carchemish back, which was their old extent of their old empire, their trade city, where they're right in the nexus between the Hittites and the Babylonians and the Assyrians, and they had this trade city, and they want to get that back. And that's all the way in the days of Josiah. Okay? But that is actually a different Egyptian clan. They've actually been taken over under the Assyrians by the Cushites. So that's where you get your black Egyptians from. Okay? They weren't the OGs. They were taken over in the times of the Assyrians. So the Philistines are strong, but they're not going to try to push weight over all of Israel. They're pushing weight basically on the lowlands to the west of Judah. They've got them all backed up in the mountains. They're not trying to climb the mountains and go fight them. But neither are the Judahites getting into the good lowlands and getting the pasture and farms and all the stuff that they need to grow and thrive. Okay? So the Philistines are oppressing them for 40 years. And you get that timeline of that 40 years, this is around 1080. No, that's at the end of it. So add 60 years to that. 1141. Okay, that's 1141. Now 1141. This is going to be really important. 1141. Take away 40 years from that, and that's how long the Philistines are oppressing them before Samson gets involved. And that's when the Bronze Age collapse happens. Okay. This is when the Bronze Age collapse happens. It starts, when it's done, when it's finally finished, okay? It starts up here during around the time that it starts around, 40 years before Deborah and Barak complain about the Danites not getting off their ships because they're taking Cyprus and they're knocking out the Hittites, and that's one chunk of the bronze trade. And then it's going to end with Samson knocking out Crete, and that's the other part of the bronze trade, okay? So notice when these years are. You get your secular historians and you figure out when the Bronze Age collapses. And they say the Bronze Age collapse was during the 12th century BC. It begins in 1200 BC, and it says it's over by 1100 BC. And it doesn't. It basically is the beginning of this. It says The palace economy of Mycenaean Greek, the Aegean region, and Anatolia that characterized the late Bronze Age disintegrated, transforming into small, isolated village cultures in the Greek Dark Ages, which lasted around 1100, from the beginning of the better-known Archaic Age to around 750 BC. So it's around 800 BC that the Greeks learned writing, okay? Like, not cuneiform. Everybody had cuneiform, but only some people could read it. But actual script writing. They're going to get the Phoenician alphabet, which is derived from the Hebrew script. Okay? So, basically, this culture, this Mycenaean culture, or it's the Minoan civilization that's here in Crete, is going to fall during this time. And you see 1100 BC is when the Minoan civilization falls. This civilization lasts, they say 3100 BC. It's probably something that might even have pre-flood connotations to it, but it ends in 1100 BC, which is when Samson gets going. Okay? That's when this civilization collapses. So what happens over here? And remember, the people over here are Cretans, okay? And the Cretans are run by the Captorim. So if you look at Minoan pottery, what is going to be a common motif in Minoan pottery is sea stuff, because it's an island, but another one is going to be brown-skinned men. Notice they look just like the Egyptians if you look at the Egyptian hieroglyphs, with white-skinned, bare-breasted women. Okay, why? Because these are Egyptian men, this is where the Philistines are descended from, and these are Greek women. Okay? What is this demonstrating? This is demonstrating that the Egyptians were in charge. Okay? So you see these, obviously they're fawning over their white chicks, right? Because they're pretty. And they're all fancy dressed and fancy hair and all this stuff. And you see the guys, look at the dark-skinned Egyptian guy with a white-skinned girl. Why? Because they're dominant, okay? Notice they're dressed shirtless like Egyptians would be, with skirts like Egyptians would be, and they're dressed like Greeks. So what's happening? Well, once upon a time in the Minoan civilization, they were ruled by Egyptians. So here's what happened. During the days of Avaris, okay, the Jews are going to set up a trade culture, and they're going to apparently lead the Egyptians to take over Cyprus and Crete, okay? And when the Egyptians make the Hebrews slaves, that trade is going to be then run by the Philistines, who are basically their international garrisons, okay? And so the Philistines are going to run from Crete to Cyprus to Philistia, okay? And that's going to control the bronze trade, and that's going to go right to their garrison in Canaan. And the Cretans are descended, or the Philistines are descended from the Captorim, which are the tribe that's in Lower Egypt, which becomes the Coptic Egyptians. Okay, that's Coptic comes from Captorim. Okay, and so these Egyptians are going to be the dominant tribe in the days of Joseph, and that's who Joseph's working with. And so what happens is when the confusion of languages happens, you got to remember there's like 5 sons of Mizraim, so you're going to have all these different Egyptian languages, and so they're not all going to know the same stuff. And that king of Egypt under Joseph takes over all the other Egyptian tribes, but he's descended from the youngest Egyptian son. And he's going to set up the capital at Thebes, which is going to be right before Egypt kind of turns into the Nile River Delta. So, it's going to be Thebes up here. And the city before that was Memphis. And Memphis is going to be the city that was probably run by the eldest sons of of Mizraim, okay? And Thebes was the city, so you see Memphis is right up here ahead of the headwaters, okay? So that would have been central to Egypt. And then when the Copts take over, they're going to set up Thebes to the north of that as kind of like their main defensive city. And they're going to set up other cities to try to pin down the Cushites, but also to dominate the other Egyptian tribes. Okay, and so this Coptic language, remember there's 5 tribes of the Egyptians, which means at the Tower of Babel they get 5 different languages. But it's at this time they all become one as they learn how to interpret, because they're international community and they figure it out. Okay. 2 is the one that Joseph is helping gets the dominance over all the rest, and 3 is the Coptic Caphtorite tribal language becomes the main language of Egyptian, and all those other languages are going to disappear. Okay, so then these people from Avaris are going to go set up the trade, and because these Caphtorites are ruling Egypt, the ones that are helping them do that are going to be these Caphtorim, which is where the Philistines come from. Okay, and so by the time you get to Samson's day, the Egyptians are in decline, but the Philistines are still running Crete, and it looks like the trade or Cyprus is, but they've been kicked out of Cyprus probably by the Danites, and then the Danites have set up Dardana, and eventually they're going to rebuild Troy with the Trojans, and you're going to have Troy too there. Okay, but the Philistines are still in Crete. And so the Philistines who've been kicked out of these other places, like Cyprus, are reinforcing Crete. The Egyptians had reinforced them for the time, and the Philistines have been making a comeback ever since Israel got into idolatry, because nobody's really been fighting the Philistines. They've been fighting the Moabites and the Ammonites and the Canaanites and everybody but the Philistines, okay? With the exception of Ehud, which was hundreds of years before that, nobody's really been fighting the Philistines for them, okay? And the Philistines are kind of the last tribe they're going to have to defeat, but they have been getting more and more powerful this entire time. They're not powerful enough to go take the highlands from Israel, but they're powerful enough to oppress them in the lowlands and take tribute from them, okay? And so Samson is going to kickstart the downfall of the Philistines, and it's going to start with Samson, and it's going to end with David, okay? But it's about 100-year period when this takes place. So here's what goes down. It says, the angel of the Lord appeared unto the woman. He said to her, behold, now thou art barren and bearest not, and thou shalt conceive and bear a son. Now therefore beware, I pray thee, and do not drink wine or strong drink, and eat not any unclean thing. He says, for lo, thou shalt conceive and bear a son, and no razor shall come upon his head, for the child shall be a Nazarite unto God from the womb, and he shall begin, notice he says he shall begin to deliver Israel out of the hand of the Philistines. Notice he doesn't say deliver them out of the hand of the Philistines. He says begin to deliver Israel out of the hand of the Philistines. He starts the cascade that finally leads to the downfall of the Philistines, okay? Then the woman came and told her husband, saying, a man of God came unto me, and his countenance was like the countenance of an angel of God, very terrible, but I asked him not whence he was, neither told me his name. But he said unto me, behold, thou shalt conceive and bear a son, and now drink no wine nor strong drink, neither eat any unclean thing, for the child shall be a Nazarite to God from the womb to the day of his death. Then Manoah entreated the Lord, and said, O my Lord, let the man of God which thou didst send come again unto us, and teach us what we shall do unto the child that shall be born. And God hearkened to the voice of Manoah, and the angel of God came again to the woman as she sat in the field, but Manoah her husband was not with her. And the woman made haste, and ran, and showed her husband, and said unto him, behold, the man has appeared unto me, and came unto me the other day. And Manoah arose, and went after his wife, and came to the man, and said unto him, art thou the man that speaks unto the woman? And he said, I am. And Manoah said, now let thy words come to pass, and shall we order the child, and how shall we order the child, and what shall be done unto him? And the angel of the Lord said to Manoah, of all that I said unto the woman, let her beware. In other words, let her be careful to obey it. She may not eat anything that comes from the vine, neither let her drink wine or strong drink, nor eat any other thing. All that I commanded her, let her observe. And Manoah said unto the angel of the Lord, I pray thee, let us detain thee until we have made ready a kid for thee. So they're going to make him a goat to eat. Remember, our Lord likes snacks, okay? If the Lord visits you, offer him something to eat. Abraham did, Gideon did, Samson's dad did. People are like, he likes snacks. That's why we do these sacrifices, okay? And the angel of the Lord said to Manoah, though thou detain me, I will not eat of thy bread, and if thou wilt offer a burnt offering, thou must offer it unto the Lord, for Manoah knew that it was the angel of the Lord. And Manoah said unto the angel of the Lord, what is thy name? And when thy sayings come to pass, we may do thee honor. And the angel of the Lord said, why askest thou after my name, seeing it is secret? Okay? Now the word here, it says pili, remarkable, secret, wonderful. Okay? Now this is weird because they know their God's name is Jehovah. So it's kind of weird that he's saying my name is the secret. But this is saying this is the Lord showing up on him. But his name is secret. Okay? Notice this, the angel of Jehovah. But he's saying his name is secret. Now why is this? I don't know. It's at the end of the book of Judges. This is the last story of the book of Judges before we get to Samuel. Okay? The other ones were added later. So why at the end of this is the Lord's name a secret? I don't know. What I do know is they're worshiping all these other gods, and they might genuinely doubt whether Jehovah is the true God. That might be the reason. And he's not telling them his name. So Manoah took the kid with the meat offering and offered it on a rock to the Lord, and the angel did wondrously. And so the word is also wonderful, and he says the angel did wondrously. So you see Pali and Pala, okay? So my name is wonderful. Well, remember, when you get to Isaiah, one of the names of the Lord is Wonderful Counselor, okay? He's like, why do you ask us after my name? And you have Shem, Pali. Okay, notice this is saying seeing it is wonderful. He's saying, why do you ask after my name, Shem? It is wonderful. Okay, he's telling him his name is wonderful. And when you get to Isaiah, you're going to see, what is his name? Wonderful Counselor, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace, Mighty God. Okay? So he's saying the Most High God has three personages who all share a name. Wonderful Counselor is the Holy Spirit. Obviously, Everlasting Father is the Father. Prince of Peace is the Son. And the three of them are all Mighty God. So you have this kind of weird Trinity thing. But the Counselor is the Holy Spirit, because that's one of the ways you can interpret Paraclete. And Wonderful is the name of the Wonderful Counselor, apparently. So the name is Wonderful. Okay? And so the angel of the Lord is picking a name that more is applied to the Holy Spirit to say, that's who I am. Okay? For it came to pass when the flame came upward towards the heaven from off the altar that the angel of the Lord ascended. Let's go. So Manoah he did wondrously, and Manoah and his wife looked on. For it came to pass that when the flame went up towards heaven from off the altar, that the angel of the Lord ascended in the flame of the altar, and Manoah and his wife looked on it and fell their faces to the ground. But the angel of the Lord did no more appear to Manoah and his wife, and Manoah knew that it was the angel of the Lord. And Manoah said to his wife, we shall surely die because we have seen God. But his wife said to him, if the Lord were pleased to kill us, he would not have received a burnt offering and meat offering at our hands. Neither would he have showed us all these things, nor would it that at this time have told us such things as these. And the woman bare a son, and called his name Samson, and the child grew, and the Lord blessed him. And the Spirit of the Lord began to move on him at times in the camp of Dan between Zorah and Eshtaol. Okay? So the Danites at this time, remember, you have the Danites in the north, and the Danites have been in the north now for close to 400 years. Okay? But they've been mingling in with the Sidonians and sailing away. The rest of the Danites have been down here in Judah. Remember how we say that these Danites are going to contribute armies to David's army, I think somewhere in the ballpark of 45,000 men. Okay? But this is their main camp. And you want to think of them like the West Bank, or like these massive camp settlements that you have refugees in. Okay? That's kind of how they're living. They've got their tents. They're up here against the mountains. Remember, the Philistines are not necessarily going to go up the mountains and trying to take out the Israelites and the Ephraimites and these guys. But neither are they going to let them come down. And so the people that live down here along the mountains, they're going to come get tribute from them, which means we're going to come take some stuff from you. Okay? And they're also going to marry in with them somewhat. Okay? Timnah is going to be where Samson goes and gets a wife. So all you're doing is you're going downriver to the next city down. Say, we're a camp here and we got to buy stuff. Well, let's go into town. And they're going into Timnah. And Timnah is going to be, this is just going to be 10 miles. It's not going to be hugely far away. And this is where Samson's going to get his first wife from, okay? So the Spirit of the Lord began to move him at times in the camp between Zorah and Eshtaol. So what's going on? The Spirit of God is moving on him. We're gonna start some crap with these Philistines here, okay? How are we going to do this? Well, Samson is very strong, which means he's probably going to have a pretty heavy testosterone level, and he likes ladies. So Samson went down to Timnath and found a woman of Timnath of the daughters of the Philistines. And he came up and told his father and mother, he says, I have seen a woman of Timnath of the daughters of the Philistines. Now therefore get her for me to wife. Now remember, the other Israelites are living uphill, up in the mountains, okay? She's down in town, okay? Just got to go up the river. She's the girl downtown. Then his father and mother said unto him, Is there never a woman unto the daughters of thy brethren among all my people, that thou goest and takes a wife of the uncircumcised Philistines? And Samson says to his father, Get her for me, for she pleaseth me well. But his father and mother knew not that it was of the Lord that he sought an occasion against the Philistines, for at that time the Philistines had dominion over Israel. So apparently the Spirit of the Lord is leading him to be very attracted to this woman. Okay? Then went Samson down and his father and mother to Timnath, and they came to the vineyards of Timnath, and behold, a young lion roared against him. So notice he went down, and his father and mother, and a lion roared against him. Okay? And the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him, and rent him as he would have rent a kid, and he had nothing in his hand, but he told not his father and mother which he was done. So he was not with them when this happened, but he kills the lion with his bare hands. Now remember the story of Samson. He is a guy with a lion headdress and a club. Okay? This is the OG Samson. This is what he was known for in all your ancient records. Okay? All these other myths and stories are going to develop because Greeks are developing mythology after they get writing. Most of your Greek myths are going to come, they're going to start with Homer and build on Homer all these myths and legends. And you're going to have a guy named Orpheus, which means the orphan, and he can somehow tame animals with his harp. Okay, and you have this guy who apparently needs to go rescue his wife, and he goes down into Hades and comes back and stuff like that. Those are all built on David. They're going to have this guy named Mucius, who is supposedly going to be this son of the Muses. The Muses are going to be like the inspirational gods. Okay, I think they're roughly equivalent to the Pleiades or the Seven Sisters, but I could be mistaken. And these Muses, this guy teaches people religious stuff in Moses. And Plato, who the early church fathers said ripped off stuff, Plato and Pythagoras ripped off stuff from the Hebrews. They're going to talk about these people who Mucius and Orpheus taught to give sacrifices in order to atone for sins. Well, Mucius and Orpheus are just Moses and David. Okay? Remember, this is about 200 years after David that they learned to write, and Homer's Odyssey is going to be the first written story that they have. And Tatian believes that Homer actually lived before. Like, you had these storytellers, okay? So you had, just like you have actors and stuff like that today, you have these storytellers who orally would tell these great stories, and these stories would become famous, but they would be all oral. Well, eventually they're going to get written down. So that's how the Epic of Gilgamesh starts. That's how this other stuff starts. And you're going to have this story of Homer be the first thing written down because it is their OG origin myth. Okay, we had our origin somewhere around the destruction of Troy, and they're going to say that the destruction of Troy was around 1100 BC. Well, that's when the Danites come and do that, and they're going to have these people in their origin story called the Danoi, but then they're also going to have Hercules, and they're also going to have these guys with long hair that comb their hair for battle. You're going to have these guys with you're going to have this guy who wears a lion headdress, and he's super strong. Where are these coming from? And these are the mixing of these stories from the Danites that are among them that become, remember, the Danites are going to be pretty dominant because at least the Trojans and the Spartans and the Argives seem to all be descended from Danites. Some from the early Danites and the others from Samson. Okay? And they're going to be mixing and merging these stories together in an oral myth. And then that oral myth gets written down, and then it gets built upon all these Egyptian myths. And the story of Zeus overthrowing the Titans seems to be the story of the Cretans overthrowing their Egyptian overlords. That seems to be what it is. And then it turns mythologized into Zeus overthrowing the Titans. Because they're going to make all these stories, and they're going to use things like the planets and stuff like that to tell their stories. Okay? Because they're going to equate the gods with the planets, and the planets with and that with their myths and legends, until they eventually kind of like solidify it somewhere around the days of Pythagoras and Plato and stuff like that. So hundreds of years later. Okay? And then those myths, because they're now written down, become kind of a standard legend. Okay? You're going to have the same thing with the Hindus. You go read the Ramayana. I had to read it in college. And it's like clearly this fairy tale bedtime story that just keeps growing and growing and growing. And it seems to start with Nimrod. And it seems to end with the idea of the Kushite, dark-skinned Indians down in the south being based on this black god who lives in Sri Lanka. And Nimrod, who is supposed to represent the white people who are taken over from the north, defeating this god. Okay? But it's clear that these guys, they're not writing for hundreds of years after these things actually happen. And then it becomes solidified as their mythological legend. Okay? So anyways, he kills a lion with his bare hands. The Spirit of the Lord came mightily on him, and he rent him as he would have rent a kid, and he had nothing in his hand, but he told his father and his mother what he had, or he did not tell his father and mother what he had done. And he went down and talked with a woman. She pleased Samson well, and after a time he returned to take her, and he turned aside to see that the carcass of the lion, and behold, there was a swarm of bees and honey in the carcass of the lion. So he's coming to get his wife, okay? And there's a swarm of bees and honey in the lion. So he took one of his hands and went on eating, so he took thereof in his hands, and he went on eating, and he just grabs a chunk of the honey right out of the carcass. This is very unkosher. And he says he's eaten out of a dead carcass, okay? And he gave them, and they did eat, but he told them not that he had taken the honey out of the carcass of the lion, because that is very unclean. That's just unclean by normal standards. You got this out of a dead animal on the side of the road? Yes. Okay, I don't want none. So his father went down into the woman, and Samson made there a feast, for so used the young man to do. And it came to pass, so this is your second record in the Bible of a 7-day wedding feast, okay? First one is Jacob and Leah, and now we have Samson and his first wife, okay? And it came to pass when they saw him that they brought 30 companions to be with him. So these are your 4 type of your 144,000, which are Jesus' companions for his 7-day wedding feast, okay? And Samson said unto him, I will now put forth a riddle unto you, and if you can certainly declare it to me within the 7 days of the feast. Remember, he's going to get his bride, and it's a 7-day feast because that's how they did it, okay? And find it out, then I will give you 30 sheets and 30 change of garments. Now notice he's going to get the woman, and there's a feast, and they're not yet calling her his wife because he hasn't consummated the marriage yet, okay? He's just starting his feast. He's probably had his wedding vows. They're probably at the feast, the starting feast of this 7-day wedding feast, and he's giving him 7 days to do this, okay? So this, in the context of the 7-day wedding feast, he's going to consummate his marriage, and that's going to be his wife. This is how this goes down. First you have vows, then you have losing of the virginity, and then you have the two hosting a meal together at the end of the feast after she comes out, after she's lost her virginity, and then the 7-day feast is done, okay? But if you cannot declare it to me, then shall you give me 30 sheets and 30 changes of garments. And they said unto me, put forth a riddle that they may hear it. So in other words, I want you guys to give me 30 changes of clothes and 30 changes of bedding. Okay? You do have linen garments by this time. You do have linens. You do have nice clothes by this time. You don't have silk, but you have linen. You probably don't have cotton, and you have wool. Wool is going to be your heavy stuff, and linen is going to be your light stuff, okay? So you do have pretty nice clothes by this time. You do have linen bedding by this time. And they said unto him, out of the eater came forth meat. But this stuff is not cheap, okay? Linen garments aren't cheap today, okay? They weren't cheap back then. So he says, out of the eater came forth meat, out of the strong came forth sweetness. And they could not in 3 days expend the riddle, okay? So they've had 3 days to try to get to the riddle, okay? Then it came to pass on the 7th day. Now notice this is the 7th day in the King James. If you go to the American Standard, that should not be 7th day. They came about the 4th day, okay? It's the 4th day that they come to Samson's wife, okay? Now notice they say it came to the fourth day, and they said to Samson's wife. Now she's called his wife. Why? Because they've consummated the marriage. Okay, the midpoint of the marriage, they would have consummated the marriage by this time. Okay, so on the fourth day they come to his wife and they say, entice your husband so that he will tell us the riddle, or we will burn you in your father's house with fire. Have you invited us to impoverish us? Is this not so? So Samson's wife wept before him and said, you only hate me and you do not love me. You have propounded a riddle to the sons of my people and have not told it to me. And he said to her, behold, I have not told it to my father and mother, so should I tell you? And she wept before him 7 days while her feast lasted. Okay, so this is how you know what this is probably saying is she wept before him for the rest of the 7 days while his feast lasted. Okay, because it's on the fourth day of the feast that they come to her and ask her, and until the seventh day. Okay, so wept before him until the seventh day that their feast lasted. Okay, and on the seventh day he told her, and she pressed him so hard. So basically, for 3 days she's weeping and saying, "Tell me the secret to the riddle." Okay, now why am I showing you all this? Because it's foretyping a mid-trib rapture. Okay, the bride and the groom consummate the wedding on that midpoint of the day. In the second half, she's his wife. The first half, she's just his bride, and in the second half, after the fourth day, she's called his wife. Okay, and then she's crying before him to get the answer to the riddle. So the men on the city said to him on the seventh day before the sun went down, what is sweeter than honey and what is stronger than a lion? And he said to them, if you had not plowed with my heifer, you would not have found out my riddle. Okay, if you had not plowed with my heifer, you would not have found out my riddle. What is he saying? One of you is banging my wife. That's why you found out. One of you is banging my wife. Okay, this is no uncertain language. Okay, you again go on Wikipedia and you read the story of Dumuzid, the bull of heaven, and this Astra, which is called Anarna in there. So it's Anarna and Dumuzid becomes Ishtar and Tammuz. Okay, Anarna and Dumuz is Ishtar and Tammuz, and it talks about this bull plowing her and basically sowing into her field. Okay, very explicit language for body parts and seed planting. Okay, so when he's saying if you had not plowed with my heifer, in other words, she's my cow and you plowed with her, in other words, so one of you is sleeping with my wife. That's how you found out, and he's ticked. Okay, now nobody's sleeping with her. They threaten to kill her. But he doesn't know this, and the Holy Spirit wants him to be pissed at the Philistines to deliver Israel from the Philistines. So the Holy Spirit is not letting him know. And he's like, I think you slept with my wife, one of you, and that's how you found out. So the Spirit of the Lord came on him mightily, and he went down to Ashkelon. Okay? Well, let's see where this is. So you see where Gath is right here. Ashkelon is going to be downhill right here. So what is he going to do? He's going to leave there. He's going to go all the way down to the port city of the Philistines and kill 30 people and take their clothes to give them to these guys, okay? So he is starting up some crap with the Philistines. And he gave the changes of clothes to those who told the riddle, and his anger burned, and he went to his father's house. Why? He thinks his wife cheated on him. He thinks his wife cheated on him and gave away his riddle, and he was so mad he killed 30 people, okay? But Samson's wife was given to his companion who had been his friend. Remember, it's his 30 companions. And what these guys are there for is to prove that she's a virgin when he sleeps with her. And what he thinks is somewhere along that course of that week, his wife slept with one of these guys, and that's how he got the answer to the riddle. Now, after he leaves, because he thinks his wife cheated on him, so they think he doesn't want her anymore, his wife is going to be given to one of his groomsmen. Okay? There, you can marry her now. Why? He thinks you slept with her anyway. He doesn't want her, so you might as well marry her. Otherwise, you can pay me for causing all this trouble. Okay, I'll marry her. So, but after a while, in the time of the wheat harvest, so this is probably in the spring when he marries her, and 6 months later, he's like, he went to go visit his wife with a young goat and said, I will go into my wife in her room, but her father would not let him enter. So in other words, she's his wife, and he's like, I'm going to basically go use her like a prostitute and give her a goat. Just exactly like Judah does with his Canaanite wife. She's my wife. Remember, a concubine would be called your wife, but basically he's just using her for sex and treating her like a prostitute, okay? And her father said, I really thought you hated her intensely, so I gave her to your companion. Is not her younger sister more beautiful than she? Please let her be yours instead. I mean, this worked with Jacob and his two wives, and Samson's like, no. This is a matter of pride. Samson said to him, "This time I shall be blameless in regard to the Philistines when I do them harm. Now you gave my wife away to these Philistines because of this crap? No, no, no." So Samson went and caught 300 foxes, took torches, turned the fox's tail to tail, and put the torch between the two tails. And when he set on fire the torches, he released the foxes in the standing grain of the Philistines. Remember, all of this down here is all grain fields and stuff, okay? Philistines are going to have all these grain fields. That's why they're so rich and plenteous. That's why they're able to, basically, they're probably trading grain with the Philistines of Crete in return for bronze. That's probably what's going down with these guys, okay? They're trading bronze for food. And the Philistines said, "Who did this?" And they said, "Samson, the son-in-law of the Timnite." The son-in-law of the Timnite, okay? Because he took his wife and gave her to his companions. So the Philistines came up and burned her father with fire. And Samson said to them, "Since you act like this, I will surely take revenge on you, but after that I will quit." That's nice. So the King James says her and her father with fire. The American Standard just says her father, okay? It's probably her and her father. And so the Philistines kill her because she caused their fields to get burned because he made a marriage with Samson and then he gave her away to someone else, okay? So we're just going to kill you. So it says, and Samson said, "Though you have done this, I will be avenged of you, and after that I will cease." And he smote the hip and thigh with a great slaughter, and he went and dwelt down on the top of Edom. So he said he smote them hip and thigh. Now what does this mean? He's giving them all Charlie horses, really bad Charlie horses. That's what he's doing to all the... Now this seems to be a figure of speech, and what it seems to be is that he is going to cripple them. He smote them hip and thigh, so he injures them greatly. What does that mean? I don't know exactly, but he basically says, because of you guys burning my wife and her dad now, I'm going to avenge myself on you. And he smote them hip and thigh, and then he goes, dwells at the rock of Etam. So the rock of Etam, where he goes to dwell, is up here near Bethlehem. He leaves, he goes and kills a bunch of them, and then he goes and dwells at the rock of Etam, right up the street from Bethlehem, among the Judahites. Okay, so the Judahites going to be like, okay, let's all follow Samson and go fight the Philistines and overthrow them. No, they're not. So Etam seems to be the brother of Ephrathah, who's going to be the father of Bethlehem. Okay, so they're all close related. So he's up there in that main space where the Judahites are. Remember, Isban in a generation prior, just less than 50 years ago, he has intermarried in with all these tribes. So you've got a lot of clout up here among these Judahites. And so he's really going to like a major stronghold of where the Israelites are to lay low because he killed a bunch of Philistines. Now, the Judahites should be one of the strongest tribes of Israel, okay? What is their deal? Why are they not getting involved? Why do they seem to just deal with their own stuff? You don't have a lot going on with the Judahites, even though they're the biggest tribe in Israel, trying to help the other tribes out. And this is why your scholars are going to say that's because the Judahites weren't really anything until you get to the... period after the overthrow of the northern kingdom by Assyria, and they basically kind of made up all their history after the fact, okay? And then they were responsible primarily for writing the Bible, and they make themselves out to be bigger than they were, okay? That doesn't seem to be the case. One is they've got a big territory to manage, so they have a lot of space that they can go without necessarily having to fight anyone. To the south of them is mostly desert, so they're not going to have a lot of people, especially after they beat up the Midianites way back in the day. They're not going to have a lot of people trying to come up through the desert and invade them, okay? Between them to their southwest is the Edomites, and the Edomites don't really mess with them at all. They don't mess with Israel at all from the Edomites until you get after the days of Solomon. They start to rebel. They mess with them in the days of David, and then David puts them down, okay? So the Edomites aren't really messing. And everybody else who could potentially mess with them would have to come through the other Israelites. So I would assume they're still sending contingents to fight among the other people, but they're mostly living in peace. And they probably just grow cowardly. That's what it seems to be. They don't really have a real leader from Caleb to David. So you have Othniel. He is a Judahite. And Othniel is going to defeat this Cushan Rephaim guy, okay? So right in the beginning, they're prominent. And then they lead against the fighting against the Benjamites. And they probably lose a lot of people to that. And after that, they probably are just like, you know what? We just almost wiped out the Benjamites, and then they just gave a bunch of wives to them to regrow. I mean, we're just going to stay out and just mind our territory, okay? And they have all this mountainous territory, and they have all this territory to their south, and they're mostly just getting oppressed by the Philistines. It's going to be like 150, 200 years later when they start getting oppressed by the Philistines. And once the Philistines start to oppress them, they keep getting stronger and stronger and stronger. So they're not trying to fight them because they haven't really been helping anyone else. So who's going to help them? Okay? So they're trying to just mostly stay in their highlands and just not mess with anybody and nobody mess with them. Okay? And so you get to Samson dwelling up here in the rock of Etam. And he says, then the Philistines went up and pitched in Judah and spread themselves in Lehi. Okay? So where's Lehi? So here's Bethlehem. The Philistines came right up to the mountains, and they're pitched in Lehi. And they're about to come up on Etam and be like, we're going to start actually invading Judah. And we're going to come start taking these mountains unless you give us Samson. Okay? Notice they are not really messing up here. They're mostly just dominating the lowlands. And now the Judahites are in a real threat here. Now remember, these Philistines are descendants of the Caphtrim, and they have been growing since the days of Abraham. They've been getting stronger and stronger and stronger. There's a lot of people, but by this time, we're getting into Iron Age weapons. We're getting into more iron weapons, because when you get an established civilization with long-term cities that are there, then you can keep getting what you need to have better forges and have more heavy-duty weapons, okay? Most people are using bronze. They've had that for some time. They're moving forward to iron, okay? So the men of Judah said, why are you come up against us? And they said, to bind Samson we are come up, as he had done to Judah. So they're mostly treating them as tributaries. Give us this guy. They're treating it like a criminal affair. They're not necessarily saying, let's go to war. They're saying, give us the guy or we will go to war. And 3,000 men of Judah went to the top of the rock of Etam and said to Samson, knowest thou not that the Philistines are rulers over us, that this is what they have done to us? And he said unto him, as they did unto me, so have I done unto them. And they said unto him, we are come down to bind thee, that we may deliver you into the hand of the Philistines. And Samson said unto them, swear to me that you will not fall on me yourselves. In other words, you won't kill me yourselves. And they spoke to him, saying, no, but we will bind you fast and deliver you into their hands, but surely we will not kill you. And they bound him with 2 new cords and brought him from the rock. So they tied him up, okay? And when he came into Lehi, the Philistines shouted against him, and the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him, and the cords that were on his arms became as flax and burnt with fire, and his bands loose from off his hands. So this seems to be a miracle, because it's saying that the cords in his hands just melted, basically, okay? And he found a new jawbone of an ass, and put forth his hand, and took it, and slew 1,000 men with it. And Samson said, with the jawbone of an ass, heaps upon piece, with the jawbones of an ass, I have slain 1,000 men. Okay? So he's got this jawbone of the ass, this club, that he has. Remember, he's killed a lion. Now he's killed 1,000 men with a club. Okay? Now, if you're ridiculously strong, you got to remember, most of these guys with their swords, nobody has long swords yet. Okay? Everybody has short swords. You might see a Bronze Age sword, because bronze is much softer and more brittle than iron. The swords they have are not really long. It's not until you get into steel that you start making long swords. So you see mostly these short swords. Okay, that's what they have. Now this is one of those crook blades. This is electrum. This is something different. This is something more like what they would do with the Egyptians. They would have these swords that would double into harvesting implements, okay? So a sword would be between 18 and 24 inches, okay? If you had a sword, the longest sword you'd have is about 2 feet, about that long, okay? Now, if you can have a massive club, like how big is the jawbone of a donkey? Apparently, a donkey's jawbone is 16 inches long. That's pretty big. It's almost as long as these swords. And as these guys are coming at you with these swords, now these are the longer swords were up to 2 feet long, okay? These guys probably mostly had short swords, okay? And you're going to go into battle with a shield and a short sword. Some guys can have a bow and some guys can have slings, okay? And you're mostly knife stabbing these guys. You're not like carrying a big two-handed Aragorn sword or anything like that, okay? You don't have like the guys from Numenor making your stuff. And so Moses is going to take out 1,000 men with a jawbone of a donkey. He's just going to keep crushing their skulls. Crush, 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 crush. Everybody runs up on him. It's just a pile of dews. Crush, 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 crush. Remember, he's coming at him from uphill. It's a mountainous issue, okay? They're probably all pinned in, and he's just crushing skulls, right? And it came to pass when he made an end of speaking, he cast away the jawbone out of his hand, and that place is called Ramath Lehi. Ramath Lehi. Remember that he was in Lehi, right? And Ramath Lehi, where their camp was, he was just doing some killing. So he's downriver from them, and he just went down there. They're camped by the river because they need plenty of water, and he was just crushing until they're like, screw this, let's get out of here. This guy is clearly empowered by the gods or something. We don't want to step to this. And so he said, and he was sore athirst, and he called upon the Lord and said, Thou hast given this great deliverance into the hand of thy servant, and now shall I die of thirst and fall in the hands of the uncircumcised. And the Lord clave up a hollow place that was in the jaw, and there came water thereout. And when he had drunk, his spirit came again, and he revived. Wherefore he called the name of that En-Hakor, which is Lehi unto this day. Okay, which is in Lehi unto this day. So En-Hakor means fountain of the one calling. Okay, so fountain of the one calling. He names the place where he drops the jawbone because apparently it became a fountain of water for him. Okay, and then it just says, and he judged Israel in the days of the Philistines 20 years. Okay, now in most cases when you see and he judged this many years, that would be the end of the story. Okay, he won, he judged the Philistines for 20 years, but we don't have that here. We have 20 years he judged the Philistines. So after this, all this stuff takes place in 1 year. Okay? So remember how I said the Bronze Age collapse is going to end this year. Okay? It starts out with the Danites who go up into Anatolia, and it ends this year. This is where my records line up. Okay? And this is the year that Samson beat these guys with the jawbone of a donkey. And it ends this year. Well, why does it end this year? Well, we know the Judahites don't want him there because they don't want to go to war with the Philistines. He's just killed another 1,000 of them. Okay? What happened? He's being treated as a fugitive. The Judahites have given him up, so he can't go back to the Judahites. He doesn't want to get his fellow Danites killed. And for 20 years, he disappears. And then he comes back and he says, then Samson went to Gaza and saw there a harlot and went into her. Okay? He is not hanging. Gaza is a Philistine city. The Philistines know who he is. This is a city in the south of Gaza. He is not hanging out in the Philistine city for 20 years. Yet 20 years later, he appears in this Philistine city sleeping with a harlot. And he's going to rip off the gates and then go. Okay? Something happens in this 20-year period, okay? And I haven't fully worked out my math yet. But when you get to I read all this stuff when I was doing my rightly dividing book, and when you get to Hercules, in these old records, you have, it says, this is, I think this is Tatian the Syrian too. He says, the matter of the principal importance is endeavor with all accuracy to make it clear that Moses is not only older than Homer, but than all the writers that were before him, older than Linus, Philemon, Thamyris, Amphion, Musaeus. So Musaeus, Orpheus. Remember, I say Musaeus and Orpheus is Moses and David. These guys are not trying to connect the dots and say, I think Musaeus is Moses, I think Hercules is Samson. These guys are more like liberals who think the Old Testament might be myth. Okay? And Tatian the Syrian is going to be one of them. He's going to influence Clement and Origen, who definitely think it is allegory. Okay? And he says he's older than Demodocus, Phemius, Sibylla, Epimenides of Crete, who came to Sparta, Aristides of Proconus, who wrote in Arispama. So basically what he's saying is that all these guys are after Moses. And then he said Linus was the teacher of Hercules, but Hercules preceded the Trojan War by one generation. Now remember I said there's going to be a former and latter Trojan War, okay? He is claiming that Hiram, who is supplying the temple from David, was visited by Menelaus, who sacked Troy the second time, okay? He is claiming that this is in Phoenician records. And what he's saying is that Hercules preceded the Trojan War by one generation. So what's one generation before David and Hiram start being friends? And the answer is Samson. Samson is one generation before. So, no, I'm sorry. Samson is about two generations before, okay? This second sacking of Troy seems to be in the generation before. So you have a generation between the second sacking of Troy and then David and Hiram, okay? So this sacking of Troy, they say, happened in 1100 BC. This is what the Greeks say, okay? Well, Samson is in 1141 BC, and you're going to have 40 years of oppression, and then 20 years, and then the next generation. So 40 years later, 40 years after this year, which is one generation later, Troy gets sacked. And then 40 years after, a generation after that, you're going to have Menelaus come to King Hiram, and Hiram's going to be friends with David, and Hiram's going to help Solomon with the materials for the temple. Okay? This is all very close. So he's saying Hercules preceded the Trojan War by one generation, and this is manifest from his son Telepemeles, who served in the army against Troy. So he's saying a son of Hercules was in the battle against Troy, okay? And Orpheus lived at the same time as Hercules. Moreover, it is said that all the works attributed to him were composed by Anamacritus the Athenian, who lived during the reign of Pistorides in the 50th Olympiad. Mucius was a disciple of Orpheus, okay? So I've seen stuff that Mucius came first. I've seen stuff that Orpheus came first, okay? He is mixing Greek records with Phoenician records, and the Greeks are saying Mucius was the disciple of Orpheus because Mucius is where they get the word music from, and Orpheus was the guy who could tame animals with his harp, okay? This is Moses and David. These are the Greeks. All the Greek records are just made up BS, okay? All their ancient stuff, it's made up BS. It's all tall tales, okay? But he is matching this up with Phoenician records and saying Hercules was the generation before, and he thinks Mucius and Orpheus were around that time. I think Mucius and Orpheus are Moses and David, okay? I think Hercules is Samson. And he said Amphion, since he preceded the siege of Troy by 2 generations, forbids our collecting further particulars about him for those who are desirous of information. Democritus and Phemius lived at the very time of the Trojan War, for one resided with the suitors and others with the Phoenicians. Thamyris and Philemon were not much earlier than these. So he's accounting all the ancient Greek historians and saying they were all after the Trojan Wars, okay? And he's saying Hercules was a generation before the Trojan Wars. So now, there are a people known as the Heraclidi, which are descended from Hercules. You're going to have, what's his name? Herodotus is going to account Hercules and Egyptus as being 2 brothers, okay? Egyptus is a transliteration of Coptic, which is who the Philistines come from, and Hercules is Samson. And so what they're doing is, this is Herodotus now hundreds of years later is going to say, oh, Hercules and Egyptus were brothers. And that's why are they saying they're brothers? Because the Philistines and the Danites were actually in the Sea Peoples together. Okay? And Hercules is the Danite. And then they're going to say that there's these things called the Pillars of Hercules. Okay? Now the Pillars of Hercules are going to be the mountainous passes between Spain and Morocco. That's later on going to become the Pillars of Hercules. But what you're going to have in Herodotus is that there were these two pillars set up in Phoenicia to commemorate this Hercules. That were the oldest thing they found about Hercules, and that Hercules supposedly tricks his daughters to kill all these Egyptians, and it seems to be the story of Samson killing all the Philistines mixed up, because they're an Egyptian tribe, okay? And it seems to be merging the story of Samson killing the Philistines with the death of the Egyptian firstborn into one story, okay? And then these pillars, this monument that Herodotus says he saw in Phoenicia, so people would travel back and forth, and he saw this monument in Phoenicia, seems to commemorate Samson pushing the pillars to destroy the Philistines, okay? And this is going to be roughly 500 years after this that Herodotus is saying this. It's going to be like the 4th century BC, okay? So, no, I'm sorry, it's going to be 800 years after this, okay? So, Homer, who's going to be the first record of Hercules among the Greeks, he says, Hercules therefore was known by Homer himself only as a mortal man, and Hieronymus the philosopher describes the make of his body as tall, bristling haired, robust, and Diarchus says that he was square built, muscular, dark, hook nose with grayish eyes and long hair. So Hercules wears a lion's mane, he has a distinctly Jewish hook nose, and he has long hair, and he carries around a club. Okay, so he's saying before all the myths and legends of Hercules developed, the oldest people said he was a mortal man. He was a big, muscular, mortal man with long hair and a hook nose, wearing a lion's mane and a club. And what I'm suggesting to you is that what happened in those 20 years is that Samson leaves the Judahites because they don't want him around. He leaves the Danites because he doesn't want to endanger his folk, and he's going to go the one place where he can go, which is up to Dan. And those Danites are sailing among the Greeks now with the Sea Peoples, and they have been doing so for at least 200 years, probably close to 300 years, okay? They have cities now in Anatolia, and they know, because these guys were part of the original Avaros people who set up the trade, they know the bronze trade comes from Crete, okay? And so what I think he's going to do is go with the Danites over to Crete. I think he's going to work with the Greeks against the Philistines, and the Greek king that he helps is Zeus. I think because Zeus is known to have a tomb on Crete, okay? And I think, this is all just theory, that he married a daughter of Zeus, and from that daughter, possibly he married multiple people, but this is 20 years he's got, okay? From the daughter that he marries come the Spartans and the Argives, so the Argonauts, okay? The other Danites rebuild Troy over the centuries. Remember, you got 200 years here. And these people are going to form the Peloponnesian League. And so at that point, the last major source of bronze has now been taken out, okay? It's not that there is no bronze there, it's that this supply line that you had, because remember, they had to get tin all the way from Tarshish from the cousins of these Greeks in Crete, okay? Tarshish is another Greek tribe, okay? And so they had to get that from them. Well, once they're overthrown, you're going to have a little bit of putting stuff back together that's going to take some time, and they're going to decide who they give bronze to because it's valuable, right? It's a major tool for tools and weapons, okay? So they're not just going to give it away to everybody. And it's going to take some time for that to build up. But you probably have the Israelites getting access of it through the Danites. And you're going to have the Phoenicians getting access to it. And who's not going to get access to it is the Philistines anymore. And what the Philistines then do is go to iron weapons, which take a lot longer to make but they're a lot more durable and a lot stronger. And so by the time you get into the Philistines after that, they're using iron weapons because they've lost connection to the bronze trade. But even though it's all circumstantial evidence, we have a lot of circumstantial evidence that Samson is Hercules. And we have a 20-year gap, and it seems to match that Samson goes there, he fathers these people who become the Argives and the Spartans, and he's probably famous among them already because he's got other Danites with him, and they become the aristocracy of these peoples, the Argives and the Lacedaemonians in this Peloponnesian League, and then those people, a generation later, are going to go sack Troy again, okay? Because Troy is on the come up. It's their main rival, and what you have is this story. This is what the Greeks are going to get from Homer. You have this story of Europa, and Europa is supposedly a Phoenician woman who was kidnapped by Zeus and taken to Crete. I don't know who this is, but supposedly he's turned into a bull, slept with her, and made a minotaur bull. So you have this mixed up Nephilim story going into this Phoenician legend. And this Phoenician legend about how this literally is being told in Herodotus' day as what originally started the problem with the Greeks and the Persians. Okay? The Greeks just keep making stuff up and mingling stories, and they're learning to write late to the game, and they're literally getting stuff from the Egyptians, and they're getting stuff from the Phoenicians. They don't really have any of their own history. In fact, when you read Plato's Timaeus, the Egyptians are telling them they don't know any history. They don't have any history because they don't have any writing. Okay? And they're saying they don't even know how old they are. Okay? And they keep making stuff up and mixing and mingling all these stories. And this Europa story seems to be based on the Helen of Troy story. They seem to be one and the same. But they're coming from different sources around different times. They're just mixing and mingling, and there's something about a kidnapped woman. Okay? Maybe that story is about Samson's wife. Who knows? Maybe that story is about David's wife being taken. Who knows? We don't know where the real original story is because they all have these twisted stories and they just keep making stuff up. So Tatian's accounting all these legendary stories of Hercules, but he's saying the oldest people that we know that wrote among the Greeks, which seem to be around the time of after this Trojan War, and Homer seems to have been roughly contemporary with the Trojan War, but I don't think that's what Tatian thinks. I think he's like 200, 300 years later. They say Hercules is a mortal man, big, strong, muscular man with long hair and a hooked nose, who wears a lion's mane and has a club. Okay? All this stuff stinks of Samson. So much so that people think the Jews ripped off the story of Hercules to create Samson later on. Okay? I don't believe that's true. I believe the Samson story was the OG, and it got turned into this because Samson went over there, helped the Greeks overthrow the last of the Philistines in Crete, kicked them out, went up and started the Peloponnesian League, and from there, this group of tribes, Greek tribes and Danites, came together and started basically a confederacy which dominated the bronze trade after that. And because they dominated the bronze trade, that made sure the Philistines got no more bronze, okay? Remember, Samson is responsible for starting the downfall of the Philistines. He doesn't finish it, but he starts the downfall of the Philistines, okay? So when we get to, I think it's Samuel's day, I think they talk about them having iron. Let me see. So it doesn't really say that it's iron, but by the time you get to Israel, you have the Philistines not allowing the Judahites to get anything forged. Okay? They have to go down to them to get their tools forged. Okay? Well, that wouldn't be a problem with bronze. In bronze, you just need to make a fire. You can do that yourself to repair your weapons and stuff. But if you're working with iron, you need much more stronger, hotter forges to get that done. And it says the Philistines didn't allow the Jews to have any of that, and they had to all get it all from them. Okay? So that's going to be in the next generation. So that's when they're going to get into Iron Age weapons, and they're really going to dominate with those Iron Age weapons, but they lead to iron tools and iron weapons becoming predominant after that. Okay? Remember, this is the Bronze Age collapse. After people start realizing that, yes, this iron takes longer to make, but it lasts way longer, and you can keep reshaping it. You just need better forges and a better economy to be able to do it. people stick with iron after that, okay? So the population is going to be a lot more heavy in the world, and you're just going to have more room for stuff like this. So in that 20 years, that seems to be when Samson completes, right in the beginning of that 20 years, I'm sorry. He's going to complete the overthrow of Crete. That's what he seems to go immediately after that to do, is jump on with the Danites and probably get the Danites to go take out the Philistines from Crete. And then after that, he is going to, with those Danites, start the Spartan and the Argive civilization, okay? And we know this because we find out that the Spartans are descendants of Abraham from the letter of Onias in the book of Maccabees, okay? Onias is going to be a priest that is before, like a generation or so before Antiochus Epiphanes in Israel. And he is going to write a letter to the Spartans letting them know that we're related through Abraham, and the Spartans are going to write back and confirm it, okay? So the Spartans are definitely Danites. We know this. The Argives are less prominent in that day, but the story always is they count time. The Greeks count time from the date that Samson came, or that Hercules came to the Argives, okay? That's like a major historical point for them, and that's because that's probably either he's going to the Argives, which are Danites already, and getting them to help overthrow Crete, or he's overthrown Crete, and that's when he came from them. But it's that time. That's like a major historical point for them, and that is one generation before Troy is destroyed, okay? So the next generation, these Danites that are in Peloponnese with the descendants of Samson overthrow Troy. And then after that, Menelaus, who seems to be a descendant of Hercules, that's the claim, which means he could be a descendant of Samson, is going to come to the king of Tyre, who they're also mixed in with the Danites, okay? Because the Hiram, who comes from Tyre, is half Danite, half Naphthalite, okay? And he is sent by Hiram to help build the temple, okay? So that's what I believe really went down. I'm going to do more research and put that into my Serpent by the Way book. So now, 20 years later, the decline of the Philistines is started. Samson comes back. He goes to Gaza. Gaza is in the opposite end of the Philistine kingdom where he started, okay? So he's up here in Zorah and Eshtaol. Ashkelon, where he kills those first guys, is up here. Gaza is way down here. It's the opposite end of Philistia, okay? Same Gaza Strip we're in today. And when he gets there, it's 20 years later, it was told to the Gazites saying, Samson has come here. Notice he hasn't been there the whole time. It's 20 years later, he's there. Samson, the famous Samson? Yes, the famous Samson. And they compassed him in and lied wait for him all the night in the gate of the city, and they're quiet all night, saying, in the morning, when it is day, we shall kill him. And Samson lay till midnight, and arose at midnight, and took the doors of the gate of the city, and the two posts, and went away with them, bar and all. So they would have had a big iron bar guarding their gate, and these big wooden gates, okay? And put them on his shoulders, and carried them up the hill, onto the top of the hill that is before Hebron. So he carried this from Gaza to Hebron is 50 miles. This is the story of this beast mode dude, okay? It's about 40 miles, okay? Hebron is here, Gaza is here, okay? Now remember, he starts out messing with them over here, okay? He comes back to Gaza, which is a big port city, okay? Which means he was done with his adventures over among the Greeks for 20 years, setting up new tribes and colonies and stuff, and said, whatever you do, don't let these Philistines get bronze again, okay? Screw these guys. And he's going to show up back, and he's going to be like, then I'm going to show up at Gaza, of all places, go sleep with a prostitute. And when he gets caught, he goes and takes the gate and carries it 50 miles up mountains to Hebron to show up to those Judites and be like, you guys are punks. All of you are punks. I don't like any of you. And that's why you have the Danites outside of Israel among the Greeks. and playing Viking lords and stuff like that instead. And it came to pass afterwards that he loved a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. Okay, so now he's going to get into it with Delilah. This is the end of his 20-year career. Okay, and the lords of the Philistines came up to her and said to her, "Entice him and see wherein his great strength lies, and what it means that by what means we can prevail against him, that we may bind him and afflict him. We will give thee every one of us 1,100 pieces of silver." That is a lot of money. Okay, if silver is a day's wage, even back then, you're like, for a prostitute, you're doing all right. Okay, it doesn't say that she's a prostitute though. It just says she's a woman that he fell in love with. Okay, whoever this woman is, maybe she's independently wealthy, maybe she's a prostitute. We don't really know. But the 5 lords, that's 5,500 pieces of silver. That's a lot of monteys. Okay, and Delilah said to Samson, "Tell me, I pray thee, wherein thy great strength lies, and wherewith thou wilt be bound to afflict thee." And Samson said to her, "If you bind me with 7 green withs that are never dried, so 7 green cords that are never dried, then I will be as weak as other mans." And the Lord of the Philistine brought with her 7 green withs that had never been dried, and she bound them with them. And there the men were lying in wait, abiding with her in her chamber. And she said unto him, "The Philistines be upon thee." And Samson broke the withs, and as the thread of a tow is broken when it touches the fire, so his strength was not known. I don't like all these words that I don't understand. Whoever can read all that and say, "Oh, the King James doesn't use archaic language." Well, what's the width of a toe? Or tell me what that. Bind me with new ropes that have never been used. There you go. Delilah took the new ropes and bound them with them, and the Philistines are upon you, Samson, and men lying wait in an inner chamber. But he snapped the ropes off his arms like a thread. And Delilah said to Samson, "Until now you have mocked me and told me lies. Tell me how you could be bound." And he said, "If you weave the 7 locks of my head in a web and make it tight with a pin, I shall become weak like anyone else." And while he slept, Delilah took the 7 locks of his head and wove them into a web and made them tight with a pin. And he said to him, "Philistines are upon you, Samson." But he woke from his sleep, pulled away the pin and the loom and the web. And she said to him, "How can you say I love you when your heart is not with me? You have mocked me 3 times. You have not told me what makes your strength great." Okay? Now, it says, finally, after she had nagged him with words day after day and pestered him, he was tired to death, so he told her the whole secret. And he says, "A razor has never come upon my head. Hercules is known for having long hair. For I have been a Nazarite to God from my mother's womb, and if my head were shaved, that my strength would leave me, I would become weak like anyone else." And Delilah realized that he had told her his whole secret, and she sent and called the lords of the Philistines, saying, "This time come up, for he has told his whole secret to me." And then the lords of the Philistines came up to her and brought the money in their hands, and she let him fall asleep in their lap. And she called a man, had him shave off the locks of his head, and he began to weaken, and his strength left him. And then she said, "The Philistines are upon you, Samson." And when he broke from his sleep, she thought, "I will go out as at other times and shake myself free." But he did not know that the Lord had left him. Okay, he violated his command and gave up his secrets, and his strength is gone. So the Philistines seized him and gouged out his eyes and brought him down to Gaza and bound him with bronze shekels, and he ground the mill in the prison. So he's pushing a mill around like he was a donkey or some animal that they'd have go around in circles while you have this millstone turning around this other millstone and crushing the grain. Okay? But the hair of his head began to grow after it had been shaved. Now the lords of the Philistines gathered to offer the great sacrifice to their god Dagon and to rejoice, for they said, "Our God has given Samson, our enemy, into our hand." Okay? Now, people think Dagon is a fish god. There doesn't seem to be any evidence of that. That came later. Dagon is a god that seems to be worshipped among the Hittites, or the Syrians. I'm sorry, the ancient Syrians are worshiping this guy. Now remember, the Egyptians who worked with the Philistines had once taken over up into Syria, but he's a god of prosperity. He seems to be their version of the Most High God. Okay. He has a wife named Shalash. That seems to be their version of the Holy Spirit, and a child named Hadad. Hadad seems to be their equivalent to Baal. Okay, so this would be a Ugaritic version of the false Trinity. Okay, so remember, Baal is based on the storm god. He's going to become the basis for Zeus and the god of lightning and all that. See Hadad here, and and it started in the city in Syria, and somehow the Philistines picked this up. Why they don't have Egyptian gods, I don't know. Why they don't have Canaanite gods, I don't know. For whatever reason, they worship a Syrian god. Okay? So, they say, our God has given Samson, our enemy, into our hand. And when the people saw him, they praised their God, and they said, our God has given our enemy into our hand, the ravager of our country, who has killed many of us. And when their hearts were merry, they said, call Samson and let him entertain us. Remember, he's been in there for 3 years chilling. Okay? So they called Samson out of the prison, and he performed for them, and they made him stand between the pillars. And Samson said to the attendant who held him by the hand, let me feel the pillars on the house which he rests, so I can lean on them. Okay? So they're basically bringing out Samson to make fun of him. Look at our guy, okay? We got him. We have Kong chained up, okay? And the house was full of men and women, and the lords of the Philistines were there, and on the roof there was about 3,000 men and women who looked on while Samson performed, okay? So this is a house full of the lords of the Philistines. This is probably all the aristocrats are there, 3,000 of them, and they're all going to die. And then Samson called the Lord and said, Lord God, remember me and strengthen me only this once, O God, so that with this one act of revenge I may pay back the Philistines for my 2 eyes. And Samson grasped the 2 middle pillars on which the house rested, and he leaned his weight against them, his right hand on one and his left hand on the other. He's pushing them out. And Samson said, let me die with the Philistines. He strained with all his might, and the house fell on the lords and all the people who were in it. So those killed at his death were more than those he had killed in his life. Okay? So remember, he's killed 1,000 plus in his life, but he's killed 3,000 in his death. Okay? Has he overthrown some other Philistines? Probably. But they would have been like an aristocracy in Crete, not necessarily a big massive army in Crete. They would have been a dominant aristocracy who had been ruling for some time, and they probably, by that time, because they had been ruling for some 4, maybe 500 years, they would have had like servants among the Greeks who are doing all the work for them, and they're mostly the dominant aristocracy from Egypt. Okay, but he goes there and seems to help overthrow them. He comes back, and then he takes out the lords of the Philistines and probably most of the aristocracy who are in this temple. Okay, then his brothers, listen to this, his brothers and all his family came down and took him and brought him up and buried him between Zor and Eshtaol in the tomb of his father Manoah. He had judged Israel for 20 years. Okay. Most of the stuff that happens in Samson happens in a 4-year period at the end and a 1-year period at the beginning. Okay. You have a minimum of 16 years gap. Okay, which is plenty of time to go father some children and be part of an uprising and help situate the Danites who had already been there. It's not like Samson would have done this alone. He would have probably joined the Danites in this pirate raiding business that they were involved in. Okay? So again, this is all theory at this point. I'm not putting this forward as saying thus saith the Lord or anything like that. I'm just saying it fits the timelines, it fits the secular histories, it fits the Bronze Age collapse. And then when you get into Samuel, it's a big deal now because they're using Iron Age weapons. This is a generation later. The Bronze Age collapse has occurred, and they need to go to the Philistines to have their weapons sharpened and reforged. Okay? So that is my evidence. It's circumstantial, yes, but it works with the timelines. It fits, and I think if you were to do the archaeological research with that presumption, you would find a lot of evidence to back it up. Okay? So that's where we get to then these last 2 stories about Micah and Benjamin, and we are through the book of Judges. Okay? After this, now you want to remember, while Samson has this stuff going on, Samuel is going to be a young man to a teenager. Okay? The story of Samson overlaps with the book of Judges. I believe Samuel put together that book of Judges story. And by the time Samuel is a middle-aged man, the Eli and his sons are going to die. And by the time he's an old man, he picks Saul to be a king. Okay? So you're going to have overlap, and I estimate this overlap to be, I got 37 years to make it work out. It could be shorter than this, but essentially you're going to have 37 years after Samson is done that Samuel seems to be the main judge of Israel. So after the death of Samson, Samuel becomes the main judge. He anoints Saul of Benjamin, and then he anoints David. Okay, and then he dies. So you're probably going to have this the years of Samson's life kind of coinciding with Samuel's life, and then Samuel is going to have maybe 37 years after that where he's alone, and then alone in charge, and then the remainder of those years Saul is in charge. And Samuel's going to die towards the end of Saul's reign, and I think he's somewhere around 90 something when he dies. So the timeline fits. Okay, the point is that the timeline fits. It fits with secular history. It fits with later Greek and Phoenician history that I just showed you, and then it's going to fit with later biblical history. Okay, it all lines up to where you have 480 years between Moses giving the law and Solomon building the temple. Okay, and we are heading towards the home stretch of that 480 years. So that last 80 years is mostly going to be occupied by Saul and David. Okay, so we're somewhere around probably 380, 390 years of that, and then we're going to have some with Samson, and then some with Samuel, and then some with David, and then we are at the first temple period. Okay, so when I say this video series is going to be the rise of the kingdom of Israel, I consider the kingdom of Israel to arrive when they have built the temple. It's not that they don't have a king, it's just that the kingdom, being fully established in its glory, has the temple, and then it declines from there to the destruction of the temple, and then we get to the second temple period. Okay, so this is the rise of the kingdom of Israel, and it's going to end. I'm going to have that take you up to 1 Kings when Solomon is going to begin his reign in his glory, and then the period of 1 Kings and 1 and 2 Chronicles is going to establish what had happened was after the fact. Okay. So anyways, that's a lot. I hope you guys are blessed by that. If any of you guys ever get into the history of the Trojans, Greek history, want your comments, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. But that's what I'm pretty convinced of. I am pretty convinced that Samson is Hercules, and he helped with the overthrow of the copper trade, the bronze trade, which led to the decline of the Philistines. Okay? So I hope you guys are blessed by this. Hope you have a great rest of your week. Batman out. Peace.
Peace, I'm out. I'm Batman.